When I walked into that courtroom, my son Marcus snorted with laughter, and my daughter-in-law Brittany actually rolled her eyes at me. They sat there at the plaintiff's table, looking smug in their expensive suits, bought with credit I knew they could not afford. They had the fake medical reports stacked high. They had a corrupt lawyer who smelled like cheap cologne and desperation. They were absolutely confident that in the next 5 minutes they would be granted full guardianship over me and my estate. They looked at me standing in the doorway and saw a frail 72-year-old man in a flannel shirt who liked to fish. They saw a victim, but then the presiding judge looked up from her docket. Her face went pale. Her reading glasses slipped down her nose, and her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. She whispered into the microphone, "My God, is that Justice Blackwood?" Every head in the room turned. The bailiff straightened his tie. The stenographer stopped typing. My son leaned over to his wife and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Who is Justice Blackwood?" I adjusted my tie and smiled a cold, hard smile. "I am the man who is about to teach you the difference between a father and a defendant." They had no idea they were trying to declare the hammer insane. "My name is Thaddeus Blackwood. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I served as a federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia. They used to call me the Hammer because when I brought the gavel down, the argument was over. I have sent corrupt senators to prison. I have dismantled organized crime syndicates. I have looked into the eyes of serial killers and felt nothing but the cold wind of the law. But the greatest case of my life did not happen in a federal building. It happened in my own living room against the people I loved the most. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives with a single motion, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. It started on a Tuesday, my 72nd birthday. I was sitting in my favorite leather armchair in the study reading a biography of Thurgood Marshall. The house was quiet, too quiet. My wife Eleanor passed away 3 years ago, and since then, the silence in this big house in the suburbs of Atlanta has been my constant companion. I didn't expect a party. I am not a man who needs balloons or fanfare, but I expected a phone call, maybe a visit. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door using my cane, not because I need it, but because my knees ache when it rains. I opened it, and there they were. Marcus, my only son, and Brittany, his wife. Marcus looked tired. He always looks tired these days, the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing money you haven't earned. Brittany was smiling, that tight, practiced smile she uses when she wants something. "Happy birthday, Dad," she chirped, pushing past me into the foyer. She smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Marcus gave me a quick hug. It felt limp. He patted my back like you pat a dog you are about to put down. "Happy birthday, Pop. You look good." I closed the door. I looked at their hands. No cake, no gift bag, no card. Just a thick manila envelope tucked under Marcus's arm. "Come into the dining room, Dad," Brittany said, guiding me as if I were a toddler. "We have a surprise for you." I followed them. My instincts were already screaming. I spent 4 decades reading body language on the witness stand. I know a liar when I see one. I know the nervous tick in a jaw. I know the way eyes dart around a room avoiding contact. Marcus wouldn't look at me. He kept adjusting his cuffs. We sat down at the mahogany dining table. The table where we used to have Thanksgiving dinners. The table where I helped Marcus with his homework. Now it felt like an interrogation room. Brittany sat opposite me. She clasped her hands together on the table. "So Dad," she started, her voice dropping to a sympathetic register that set my teeth on edge. "We have been worried about you, living alone in this big house. It is too much for a man of your age. You are getting forgetful." I stared at her. I am not forgetful. I can recite the entire text of the 14th Amendment backward. I balance my checkbook down to the penny every month. "I am fine, Brittany," I said, my voice deep and steady. "The house is paid for. The lawn is mowed. What is this about?" Marcus placed the manila envelope on the table. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested in front of me. "It is just some paperwork, Pop," he said. "Just insurance stuff. You know how it is. We want to make sure you are covered in case of accidents. We updated your policy. You just need to sign at the bottom." He handed me a pen, a cheap plastic pen. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my son. "Insurance?" I asked. "Yes," Brittany nodded eagerly. Just standard liability. It protects your assets. Just sign it, Dad, so we can go out to dinner. We made reservations at that steakhouse you like. I put on my reading glasses. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the document. It was 30 pages thick. I didn't flip to the signature page like they wanted. I started at page 1. I read the title. Brittany was watching me. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't know I was reading every word. She thought I was just an old man struggling with the font size. "This is interesting," I said calmly. "What is interesting, Pop?" Marcus asked, sweat beading on his forehead. "Section 4, paragraph 2, I cited without looking down. It says, the agent hereby, Marcus Blackwood, has the authority to liquidate real property without the principal's consent to cover outstanding debts of the estate." I looked at Marcus. "But I don't have any debts, Marcus. I have 0 debt. I have a pension and a trust fund. So whose debts are we planning to pay with the sale of my house?" The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. Brittany's smile vanished. "Don't be difficult, Dad," she snapped. "It is just legal jargon. It doesn't mean anything. It is just a template." "Legal jargon is my language, Brittany," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I wrote legal jargon for 40 years. I know what a hostile takeover looks like. And this." I slammed the document down on the table, making them both jump. "This is not insurance. This is a robbery." I stood up. I picked up the document. "You come into my house on my birthday, without a cake, without a card, and you hand me a document that declares me incompetent and hands you the keys to my life. Do you think I am stupid? Do you think because I retired I stopped thinking? Pop, please." Marcus stood up, holding out his hands. "You are getting worked up. See, this is what we mean. You are agitated. You are paranoid." "I am not paranoid, Marcus. I am a judge," I roared. "And the verdict on this document is rejected." I took the papers in my hands. My grip was strong. I ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. I ripped it again and again until the durable power of attorney was nothing but confetti on the dining room floor. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "Get out of my house before I call the sheriff." Marcus didn't move toward the door. He looked at Brittany. They exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of defeat. It was a look of calculation. A look that said, Plan B. "I am sorry you feel that way, Pop," Marcus said. His voice changed. It wasn't the voice of a son anymore. It was cold, detached. "I really didn't want to do this," he continued, "but you are clearly having an episode. You are violent. You are destroying documents. You are a danger to yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed a quick message. "What are you doing?" I asked, gripping my cane. "I am helping you, Dad," Brittany said, standing up. She walked around the table, but she didn't come to me. She went to the front door and unlocked it. 2 men walked in. They were big. They wore generic blue scrubs that looked like medical uniforms, but fit like gym clothes. They weren't doctors. They were orderlies, hired muscle. One of them carried a small black bag. "Who are these men?" I demanded, backing up against the china cabinet. "This is Mr. Henderson and Mr. Tate," Marcus said. "They are private nurses. Since you are refusing to sign the voluntary agreement, we have to initiate the emergency protocol." "Protocol?" I spat. "There is no protocol. Get out of my house." Mr. Henderson, the larger of the two, stepped forward. He had a face like a slab of concrete. "Sir, please calm down," he said, his voice flat. "We need you to sit down. Your son has authorized a medical intervention." I raised my cane. "I am a former federal judge," I warned them. "If you touch me, you are committing assault, battery, and false imprisonment. You will go to federal prison for 20 years. Brittany laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Nobody listens to crazy old men, Thaddeus," she said, using my first name for the first time. "Marcus, show them the certificate." Marcus pulled another paper from his pocket. He held it up. It was a letter signed by a doctor, Dr. Filsner. "Emergency detention order," he read. "Patient exhibits signs of advanced dementia, violent outbursts and paranoia. Immediate sedation and containment required for safety." I froze. Dr. Filsner. I had never met a Dr. Filsner in my life. They had forged a medical evaluation. Or worse, they had bought one. "This is fraud," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Grab him," Brittany ordered. The 2 men lunged. I swung my cane and I hit Henderson in the shoulder, but he barely flinched. He grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back with practiced efficiency. Pain shot through my shoulder joint. My cane clattered to the floor. "Let go of me," I shouted, struggling. "Marcus, tell them to stop." Marcus looked away. He looked at the confetti on the floor. "It is for your own good, Pop," he whispered. "You need rest." I felt a sharp prick in my upper arm. The other man, Tate, had injected me. "What is that?" I gasped as my legs began to feel heavy. "Just a mild sedative, Dad," Brittany said, stepping into my line of sight. Her face was blurry now. "Just something to help you sleep. When you wake up, you will be much more cooperative." The room began to spin. The mahogany table tilted. I felt myself being lifted, being dragged. My own son, my own flesh and blood. He stood there and watched as they dragged me up the stairs of the house I had built. I tried to recite the law. I tried to shout about habeas corpus, but my tongue felt thick. The words wouldn't come. As the darkness took me, the last thing I saw was Brittany picking up the pieces of the torn document from the floor. She looked at Marcus and smiled. "Don't worry, babe," she said. "We will just print another copy. He will sign it tomorrow, even if we have to hold his hand to do it." They thought they had won. They thought the sedative would erase my mind. They thought the hammer was broken. But they forgot one thing. A judge remembers everything. And as I drifted into the blackness, I wasn't afraid. I was planning. I was preparing my case. And when I woke up, court would be in session. The needle did not hurt. That is the tragedy of modern medicine. It can steal your soul without leaving a bruise. As the liquid fire spread through my veins, my son Marcus held my shoulder. He looked away, focusing on a spot on the wallpaper, unable to watch the light fade from his father's eyes. They told me it was for my blood pressure. They told me I was agitated and needed to stabilize my heart rate. But I have sentenced enough drug traffickers to know the difference between a beta blocker and a sedative. This was heavy. This was chemical shackles. My legs turned to lead. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel in a funhouse mirror. I tried to grab the banister, but my fingers refused to close. I felt myself being lifted, not with the gentle care of a son carrying an ailing father, but with the efficient, impersonal heave of furniture movers. They dumped me onto my bed. The duvet felt suffocatingly heavy. Through the fog in my brain, I heard the sounds of my life being dismantled. The click of the door lock, the beep of my electronic keypad being disabled, the sound of drawers being ripped open. I wanted to scream. I wanted to recite the penal code for false imprisonment, but my tongue was a dead weight in my mouth. I closed my eyes, and the darkness took me. But the darkness was not empty. In the silence of that chemical sleep, my mind drifted back to Courtroom 4. It was 1998. The case was In Re, Eleanor Rigby. Not the song, but a 70-year-old widow whose nephew had petitioned for guardianship. I remembered the nephew. He wore a cheap suit and cried on the stand, talking about how much he loved his aunt, how she was a danger to herself because she left the stove on once. We granted the petition. 6 months later, the aunt was dead in a state-run facility, and the nephew was driving a Porsche bought with the proceeds of her estate. I woke up with a gasp. My mouth tasted like copper and ash. The room was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. I fell back against the pillows. I looked at the nightstand. My phone was gone. My reading glasses were gone. My laptop, which I kept on the desk to write my memoirs, was gone. Even my cane, a hand-carved piece of hickory that had been a gift from the Atlanta Bar Association, was missing. They had stripped me. They had taken every tool I had to communicate with the outside world. This is what we in the legal profession call isolation. It is the first step in breaking a witness. If you cut off their connection to reality, eventually they will accept your reality. But they forgot one thing. My reality is not defined by objects. My reality is defined by the law. And right now, the law was being broken in every square inch of this house. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, confident steps. Then, the click of the key in the lock. I closed my eyes. I slowed my breathing. I had learned this technique from a sniper who testified in a murder trial. You control the diaphragm. You mimic the rhythm of deep sleep. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. The door creaked open. A beam of light from the hallway cut across my face. He is out cold. Marcus whispered. That dose Mr. Henderson gave him was strong enough to drop a horse. Good, Brittany's voice replied. It was sharp, annoyed. We need time. We have to find the financial records before he wakes up and starts quoting the Magna Carta again. They walked into the room. I felt the mattress dip as someone sat on the edge of the bed. I smelled Brittany's perfume. It was cloying, too sweet, barely masking the scent of stale cigarette smoke. She leaned over me. I felt her breath on my face. She waved a hand in front of my closed eyes. Totally out, she said. God, he looks old when he sleeps. How long do you think we have until the hearing? 48 hours, Marcus said. He was pacing by the window. His footsteps were nervous, erratic. Dr. Filsner said if we keep him sedated, by the time we get to court, he will be drooling. He won't be able to say his own name, let alone defend himself. The judge will grant temporary guardianship immediately. And then we sell the house, Brittany asked. Then we sell the house, Marcus confirmed, and pay off the crypto loan. And maybe get that boat we talked about. You know, for mental health. We have been under so much stress lately. I lay there, a statue of flesh and bone, while my heart screamed. A boat. They were drugging me, imprisoning me, erasing my identity, all so they could buy a boat and pay off gambling debts. I heard the sound of my closet door sliding open. The hangers rattled. Brittany was searching. Where is it? She hissed. Where does he keep the account passwords? Check the shoeboxes, Marcus said. Old people always hide money in shoeboxes. I heard shoes being thrown onto the floor. My wingtips, my loafers. Pairs of shoes I had worn to swear in senators and preside over grand juries were being tossed around like garbage. Jackpot, Brittany said. My heart skipped a beat. Had she found the safe key? No. The safe key was taped under the bottom drawer of the desk in the study. She couldn't have found it. What is it? Marcus asked. She walked back toward the bed. I heard the ruffling of pages. It is a notebook, she said. A black moleskine. It is hidden in his sock drawer. I felt a surge of panic. That notebook. It wasn't financial records. It was my mind. For the last 5 years, since retirement, I had been writing a treatise on the evolution of constitutional law. I wrote in shorthand. I wrote in Latin. I wrote in the complex, layered language of jurisprudence. Brittany flipped through the pages. Marcus, look at this, she laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. Look at this handwriting. It is illegible. And what language is this? Res ipsa loquitur. Habeas corpus ad subjiciendum. In pari delicto. She paused. Marcus, this isn't English. Marcus walked over. I could hear him peering over her shoulder. It looks like gibberish, he said. Is he writing in code? Code, Brittany scoffed. Marcus, this is nonsense. It is the ramblings of a madman. Look at this page. He wrote, Nemo est supra legis, 10 times. He is writing to imaginary people. He is writing in an alien language. Alien language. I almost broke my cover. I almost sat up and shouted that Latin is the foundation of Western civilization. That Nemo est supra legis means no one is above the law, a concept they were currently violating with every breath. See, Brittany said, snapping the book shut. This is the proof we need. We don't even need the doctor's report. We just show this to the judge. Your Honor, my father-in-law spends his days writing letters to aliens in a made-up language. They will lock him up in the psych ward so fast his head will spin. She threw the notebook onto my chest. It landed with a soft thud against my heart. He is gone, Marcus, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The Thaddeus Blackwood you knew is gone. His brain is mush. We are doing him a favor. We are taking the burden off his shoulders. Marcus didn't answer immediately. I hoped, for a split second, that he would defend me, that he would say, No, Brittany, Dad was a scholar. That is Latin. But silence is the loudest form of betrayal. Yeah, Marcus finally said, his voice thick with rationalization. Yeah, you are right. He is gone. We are just managing the decline. Let's go, Brittany said. I want to check the study downstairs. I bet he keeps the checkbook in that old desk. They left the room. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. I opened my eyes. The room was the same. The darkness was the same. But something inside me had changed. The fog from the sedative was still there, clouding my vision, making my limbs heavy. But in the center of that fog, a fire had been lit. They thought I was writing gibberish. They thought I was writing to aliens. I reached up with a trembling hand and picked up the black notebook from my chest. I opened it to the page Brittany had mocked. Nemo est supra legis. No one is above the law. I wasn't writing to imaginary people. I was writing a warning they were too uneducated to read. I dragged myself into a sitting position. My head swam. I felt like vomiting, but I forced myself to focus. I am not a victim, I whispered to the empty room. I am the plaintiff, and discovery has just begun. I needed to move. I needed to act. But first, I needed to record this. My memory was good, but a drugged mind is unreliable in court. I needed a transcript. I looked around the room. They had taken the electronics, but they had left the analog tools. They didn't understand the analog world. I reached for the nightstand drawer. Empty. I reached under the mattress. Nothing. Then I remembered. The pen. On the dresser, amidst the clutter they had ignored, sat an old fountain pen set, a Mont Blanc, a retirement gift from my clerks. But this wasn't just a pen. 2 years ago, when I started having trouble with a contractor who was overcharging me for roof repairs, I had bought a specialized tool, a dictaphone disguised as a high-end fountain pen. I rolled off the bed, my legs buckled, and I hit the floor hard. Pain shot up my hip. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I crawled across the carpet, dragging my useless legs like a wounded soldier. I reached the dresser. I pulled myself up. My fingers grasped the cold resin of the pen. I twisted the cap. A tiny, almost invisible red light blinked once. Recording. I slumped back against the dresser, clutching the pen like a lifeline. Date, October 12th. I whispered into the nib. Time approximately 9 p.m. Subject, Thaddeus Blackwood. Identifying witnesses, Marcus Blackwood and Brittany Blackwood. I took a breath, fighting the waves of nausea. Witnesses entered the room while believing the subject to be unconscious. Witnesses admitted to conspiracy to commit fraud. Witness Brittany Blackwood misidentified legal Latin phrases as alien language and expressed intent to use this misinterpretation to file a false affidavit of insanity. Witness Marcus Blackwood confirmed intent to liquidate real estate assets to pay for personal gambling debts and a luxury vessel. I paused. I looked at the door. They think the hammer is broken, I whispered, my voice growing stronger with every word. But they forgot that a hammer doesn't need to be sophisticated to work. It just needs to be hard, and it needs to hit the nail on the head. I clicked the pen off. I slid it into the waistband of my pajama pants. I crawled back to the bed. It took me 10 minutes. I was sweating, shaking, and exhausted. But as I pulled the duvet back up to my chin, I smiled. Let them search the study. Let them find the checkbook. Let them think they have won. Tonight, I was a prisoner. But tomorrow, I would be the escape artist. And when I walked into that courtroom, I wouldn't just be bringing a defense. I would be bringing an indictment. I closed my eyes, but this time, I didn't drift. I waited. I waited for the sound of silence that would tell me they were asleep. Because when the guards sleep, the prisoner gets to work. 3 a.m. is the witching hour for the guilty. But for the innocent, it is the hour of clarity. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding against my ribs like a gavel striking a sounding block. The heavy chemical fog of the sedative had thinned, leaving behind a throbbing headache and a dry mouth. I sat up in bed. The room was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight cutting through the blinds. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and waited for the vertigo to pass. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked to the door. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. My son had turned my master bedroom into a cell. I felt a surge of indignation so hot it almost burned away the last remnants of the drug. I am Thaddeus Blackwood. I have presided over capital murder trials. I have stared down cartel bosses. I am not a prisoner in the house I paid for with 40 years of service to the Constitution. I looked around the room. They had taken my phone. They had taken my laptop. They had taken my cane. But they had made a mistake. They had left the pile of paperwork on the floor, the debris from my earlier outburst when I tore up the power of attorney. I knelt down, my joints protesting. I sifted through the torn paper, and there it was, a single silver paperclip attached to a fragment of the insurance policy. I picked it up. It felt cold and insignificant in my hand, but in the hands of a desperate man, even a paperclip is a weapon. I walked back to the door. I knelt by the keyhole. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to 1990. United States versus O'Malley. The defendant was a safecracker, a man with nimble fingers and a calm nervous system. During his testimony, he had explained in excruciating detail how he bypassed the tumblers of a standard pin tumbler lock. At the time, I thought he was just showing off for the jury. Now, 34 years later, I realized he was giving me a lesson. Apply tension, I whispered to myself. Rake the pins. I bent the paperclip, straightening the outer loop. I inserted it into the keyhole. I applied a slight turning pressure with my thumb on the handle. I felt the pins inside. 1, 2, 3. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from rage. I forced myself to breathe. Inhale, exhale, steady. I felt the first pin click, then the second. It was a tactile sensation, a tiny vibration that traveled up the metal wire and into my fingertips. "Come on, Thaddeus," I muttered. "You didn't convict O'Malley just to fail at his own game." Click. The lock turned. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silent house. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for the nurse or Marcus or Brittany to come charging in. Silence. I turned the handle. The door swung open. I stepped out into the hallway. The house was breathing. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. The wind rattled the window pane at the end of the corridor. I moved like a ghost. I didn't have my cane, so I used the wall for support, sliding my hand along the familiar wallpaper. Every step was a victory. Every breath of unfiltered air was a rebellion. I reached the top of the stairs. I looked down into the foyer. It was empty. The shadows were long and distorted. I gripped the banister and began the descent. One step at a time. Don't slip. Don't fall. If I fell, I would break a hip, and the game would be over. They would win. I reached the ground floor. I didn't go to the front door. The alarm system was active, and I knew Marcus would have changed the code. I headed for the study. My study is my sanctuary. It is a room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with case law, history, and philosophy. It smells of old paper and lemon oil. It is the one room in the house where I felt truly myself. I pushed the door open. They had been here. Drawers were pulled out. Papers were scattered on the Persian rug. They had been looking for financial records, looking for the keys to the kingdom. I walked to the heavy oak desk, my desk. I sat down in my leather chair. For a moment, I just sat there feeling the familiar contours of the seat. I reached for the phone. It was an old landline, a heavy black unit from the 80s. Brittany had tried to get me to throw it out for years, calling it an eyesore. But I kept it because it worked when the power went out. And more importantly, it was on a separate line from the main house, a secure line I used for judicial business back in the day. I picked up the receiver. There was a dial tone, the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the 9. Call the police. That was the logical step. I was being held against my will. I was being drugged. But then I remembered the letter, the emergency detention order signed by Dr. Filsner. If the police came, Marcus would show them the letter. He would say I was having a dementia episode. He would say I was wandering the house at 3 a.m., confused and aggressive. The police would look at the paperwork. They would look at my shaking hands. And they would believe the young, well-dressed man over the old black man in pajamas. I couldn't call the police. I needed someone who operated above the police. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. I didn't need to look it up. Some numbers are etched into your soul. Ring, ring, ring. "Pick up, you old goat," I whispered. On the 4th ring, a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Who is this at this god-forsaken hour?" "Jenkins," I said. "Put down the whiskey and listen to me." There was a pause, a long silence on the other end. Then the voice changed. It lost the sleepiness and gained the sharp edge of a career politician. "Thaddeus, is that you? My God, I haven't heard your voice since Eleanor's funeral." "It is me," I said, "and I am not calling to catch up. I am calling to cash in the favor from '89. Senator William Jenkins. We had fished together for 20 years. But before that, I had saved his career when he was falsely accused of embezzlement. I had dismissed the case with prejudice due to prosecutorial misconduct. He owed me. And Jenkins was a man who understood the currency of favors. "What do you need?" Thaddeus Jenkins asked. His voice was all business now. "I need a shark," I said. "I am being held prisoner in my own home, Jenkins. My son and his wife are trying to ram a guardianship petition through the probate court. They have forged medical documents. They have a corrupt doctor. They are trying to declare the hammer insane." Jenkins let out a low whistle. "The classic grab," he said. "Jesus, Thaddeus. I thought Marcus was a good kid." "He was," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "until he wasn't. Listen, Bill, the hearing is in 48 hours. If I walk in there alone, they will bury me. I need you to pull the file on the presiding judge. I need you to find out who is sitting on the bench in Family Court 3, and I need you to prepare a writ of habeas corpus, just in case." "Consider it done," Jenkins said. "But Thaddeus, if they have medical papers, you need to debunk them. You need to show up looking like a Supreme Court justice, not a victim." "I will," I said, "but I need to get out of here first." "I will send a car," Jenkins said. "When?" "Not yet," I said. "If I leave now, they will claim I wandered off and put out a silver alert. I need to beat them in the room. I need to face them. Just be ready, Bill. When I call again, answer the damn phone." "I will," Jenkins said. "Give them hell, Hammer." I hung up the phone. I felt stronger. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a litigant with counsel. I was about to stand up when I heard a sound. It was coming from the French doors that led to the patio. The study opened out onto the back garden. The doors were slightly ajar. I heard a voice, a low, angry whisper. It was Marcus. I froze. I slid out of the chair and crouched down behind the desk. My knees screamed in protest, but I ignored them. I crawled across the rug until I was pressed against the wall next to the open door. I smelled cigarette smoke. Marcus didn't smoke. At least he didn't used to. "I tell you it is a sure thing," Marcus was saying. His voice was trembling. I could hear the click of a lighter. I listened. I held my breath. "No, Rocco, you don't understand," he hissed. "The old man is done. We have the papers ready. The judge will sign off on Thursday. Once I have the guardianship, I have access to the trust." Pause. "Yes, the whole trust," Marcus said, desperate now. 5 million. It is sitting in bonds. I can liquidate it in 24 hours. I will have your money on Friday. I swear on my life." I covered my mouth with my hand. $5 million. That was the entirety of my estate. That was the money I had set aside for the scholarship fund for the local library, for my future grandchildren. $5 million was the price of my son's soul. "Please, Rocco," Marcus begged. "Don't hurt Brittany. Don't come to the house. Just give me 2 more days. I am selling the house too. That is another 800 grand. It is all yours. Just call off the dogs." I heard him take a ragged breath. Yeah, I know. Thursday, or I am a dead man. I got it." He hung up. I heard the phone clatter onto the patio table. I heard him weeping. Soft, pathetic sobs of a man who has dug a grave so deep he can't see the sky anymore. I sat there in the dark. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had turned into a block of ice. I had suspected greed. I had suspected selfishness. But this was desperation. My son was in debt to loan sharks. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to strip mine me to save his own skin. He was willing to put his father in an asylum to pay for his own mistakes. I realized then that there was no saving him. There was no talking this out. There was no family meeting that could fix this. Marcus had made his choice. He had chosen the sharks over his father. I crawled back to the desk. I used the edge to pull myself up. I looked at the phone. I had the testimony. I had the motive. And thanks to Jenkins, I would have the venue. I looked out the window at the silhouette of my son, smoking on the patio, weeping into his hands. "Cry now, son," I whispered, "because when I am done with you in court, you won't have any tears left." I turned and walked out of the study. I climbed the stairs one painful step at a time. I went back to my cell. I locked the door from the inside. I lay down on the bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, creating a mental exhibit list. Exhibit A, the forged letter. Exhibit B, the locked door. Exhibit C, the $5 million motive. They wanted a fight. They wanted to take on the hammer. Well, court is in session, and I am the law. The sun rose over Atlanta at 6 in the morning, but my personal nightmare did not begin until 7. That was when my bedroom door opened, and my son Marcus walked in, followed by a woman who blocked out the light from the hallway. He introduced her as Nurse Cray, but in my mind, she was Nurse Ratched from the moment I saw her. She stood 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the seams of her blue scrubs. Her arms were thick and crossed over her chest, and she looked at me not with the compassion of a caregiver, but with the bored hostility of a prison guard starting a double shift. "This is for your own safety, Pop," Marcus said, avoiding my eyes as usual. "Since you are wandering at night and showing signs of aggression, we hired a 24-hour companion. She will make sure you take your medication and stay in bed." I looked at the woman. She was chewing gum with a slow, rhythmic motion that grated on my nerves. She smelled of stale tobacco and cheap vanilla body spray. "I do not need a babysitter, Marcus," I said, sitting up against the pillows. "And I certainly do not need a warden." Nurse Cray stepped forward. Her rubber-soled shoes squeaked on the hardwood floor. "It is not up to you, sweetie," she said. Her voice was like gravel in a blender. "Mr. Blackwood here is paying me good money to make sure you don't hurt yourself. So let's start by being a good boy and taking our breakfast vitamins." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic cup. Inside were 2 blue pills, the same sedatives they had forced on me the night before. "I am not taking those," I said. "Oh yes, you are," she said. She moved with a speed that was terrifying for a woman of her size. She grabbed my jaw with one hand, her fingers digging into my cheeks with bruising force. She squeezed until I was forced to open my mouth. With the other hand, she dumped the pills onto my tongue and clamped my mouth shut. "Swallow," she ordered. I stared at her. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was assault. This was battery. This was a violation of my civil rights. But I knew that if I fought her physically, I would lose. She was younger, stronger, and enjoyed this. So I did what any smart defendant does when cornered. I improvised. I let my throat convulse as if I were swallowing. I mimicked the motion perfectly. It was a trick I had seen a cartel hitman use in court once, when he tried to swallow a SIM card before the bailiffs could get to him. I moved the pills with my tongue, sliding them between my gum and my cheek. "Good boy," she sneered, releasing my jaw. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it? Now lie back down. No walking today. Doctor's orders." She turned her back to me, walking over to the armchair in the corner, where she had dumped her oversized purse. She pulled out a magazine and flopped down, ignoring me completely. I waited. I counted the seconds. The bitter taste of the chemical coating on the pills was starting to dissolve in my mouth. I needed to get rid of them. I coughed. I pretended to wipe my mouth with the tissue I kept in my pajama pocket. In one fluid motion, I spat the pills into the tissue and crumpled it up. I slid the tissue under my pillow. Step 1 complete. I was sober. I was alert. And now I was angry. For the next 2 hours, I lay there watching her. I watched her read. I watched her scroll on her phone. I watched her do everything except care for her patient. She was comfortable, arrogant. She thought I was just a senile old man drifting off into a drug-induced haze. Then at 9:30, opportunity knocked, or rather, it rumbled. Nurse Cray stood up. She patted her stomach. "I need coffee," she announced to the room. "And I need to use the little girl's room. Don't you move, old man. I will know if you do." She walked into the ensuite bathroom, leaving the bedroom door open, but closing the bathroom door behind her. I heard the lock click. Then I heard the fan turn on. I threw off the covers. My legs were stiff, but my adrenaline was surging. I swung my feet to the floor. I didn't go for the door. I went for the chair. I moved silently across the room, my bare feet making no sound on the rug. I reached the armchair where she had left her purse. It was a large, chaotic tote bag that was unzipped. I am a judge. I believe in warrants. I believe in probable cause. But today I was operating under the doctrine of exigent circumstances. I reached into the bag. My fingers brushed against loose change, candy wrappers, and a pack of cigarettes. I pushed past the trash until I felt the leather of a wallet. I pulled it out. I opened it. The driver's license photo was younger, but the cold eyes were the same. Brenda Stokes. Stokes, not Cray. I memorized the name. I dug deeper. Behind the credit cards was a folded piece of paper. It looked official. The edges were worn as if it had been unfolded and refolded many times. I opened it. It was a letter from the Georgia Board of Nursing. "Dear Ms. Stokes, this letter is to inform you that your license to practice as a registered nurse has been permanently revoked, effective immediately. due to substantiated allegations of patient abuse and theft of narcotics at the Shady Pines Elder Care Facility. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She wasn't a nurse. She was a predator. Marcus hadn't just hired a caregiver. He had hired a woman who had been fired for beating old people and stealing their drugs. He had brought a criminal into my home. I quickly folded the letter and put it back. I shoved the wallet back into the depths of the bag. I wasn't done. I needed more. Knowledge is power, but evidence is conviction. I looked at the dresser across the room. The Mont Blanc pen. The one with the recording device I had retrieved last night. It was sitting right there where I had left it, disguised as a harmless writing instrument. I limped over to the dresser. I grabbed the pen. I checked the tiny light. It was charged. I heard the toilet flush in the bathroom. I scrambled back to the bed. I threw myself onto the mattress and pulled the covers up to my chin, just as the bathroom door opened. Nurse Cray walked out, wiping her hands on her scrubs. She looked at me. I lay perfectly still, my mouth slightly open, my breathing shallow, mimicking the deep sleep of the sedated. "Still out," she muttered. "Good." She walked back to her chair and sat down. I waited 5 minutes, then I slowly sat up. I rubbed my eyes, acting groggy. "Who are you?" I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. She looked up from her phone, annoyed. "I told you already. I am your nurse. Now shut up and go back to sleep." I reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. My hand trembled, and I knocked the glass over. Water spilled onto the floor. "Oops," I said. "For God's sake," she groaned. She stood up, throwing her magazine down. "You clumsy old fool." She stomped over to the bed. She grabbed a towel from the bathroom and bent down to wipe up the water. While she was bent down, I reached into my pocket and clicked the top of the pen. The red light blinked once. We were live. "You are hurting me," I whimpered. She stood up, towering over me. "I haven't even touched you yet," she hissed. "But keep making a mess and I will give you something to cry about." "My son wouldn't like that," I said, baiting the trap. "Marcus pays you to take care of me." She laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "Honey, your son doesn't pay me to take care of you. He pays me to keep you in this room and keep you quiet. He told me you were a problem. He told me you were sitting on a pile of money that he needs. So if I were you, I would stop pretending you have any power here. You are just a paycheck to him and a nuisance to me." I looked at her. I let the fear show in my eyes because I knew it would make her bold. "Please," I said. "I am thirsty." "Get it yourself," she said. "Oh wait, you can't. Because if you get out of that bed again, I will tie you to it. Do you understand me, Thaddeus? I will strap you down so tight you will lose circulation. I did it at the last place, and I will do it here." She leaned in close, her face inches from mine. "Nobody cares about you. You are just an old man who lived too long. So do us all a favor and just fade away." She turned and walked back to her chair. I reached under the covers. I clicked the pen. Recording saved. I lay back against the pillows. My heart was pounding, but this time it was with triumph. She had admitted to the conspiracy. She had admitted to the abuse. She had threatened physical restraint. And she had done it all while admitting that my son was the architect of my imprisonment. I closed my eyes. Brenda Stokes. Revoked license. History of abuse. Marcus had made a fatal error. In his haste to find someone to do his dirty work, he hadn't vetted his employee. Or worse, he had chosen her specifically because of her cruelty. Either way, she was no longer my jailer. She was my star witness. I touched the pen in my pocket. It felt warm. I looked at her sitting there, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that she had just testified against herself in federal court. "Enjoy your magazine, Brenda," I thought. "Read it while you can, because where you are going, the only reading material is the inmate handbook." I needed to survive 24 more hours. I needed to endure the indignity, the threats, and the isolation. But I could do it. I had the evidence. I had the plan. And most importantly, I had the fire. The hammer was not insane. The hammer was just gathering nails. And when I started swinging, I wasn't going to stop until the whole house of cards came crashing down. The drive to the clinic was a silent affair. Marcus kept the child safety locks engaged on the rear doors of his BMW, a car I knew he was 3 months behind on payments for. I sat in the back seat, watching the sprawling suburbs of Atlanta roll by. I saw people walking their dogs, mail carriers delivering post, kids waiting for school buses, normal life. It was happening just inches away, on the other side of the tinted glass, but it felt like a different dimension. I was no longer a participant in society. I was cargo. We pulled into a medical park off the highway. It wasn't one of the prestigious teaching hospitals downtown, where I used to serve on the ethics board. This was a strip mall operation, tucked between a dialysis center and a We Buy Gold storefront. The sign above the door read Atlanta Cognitive Wellness Center, but the paint was peeling and the blinds were drawn tight. Marcus parked the car. He turned to me, his face tight with that fake concern he had perfected over the last 48 hours. "Now, Pop, listen to me. Dr. Filsner is a specialist. He is going to ask you some questions. I need you to be calm. Don't start shouting about the Constitution. Don't start threatening to sue people. Just answer the questions so we can get you the right medication." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who used to sit on my lap while I read him bedtime stories. "I am always calm, Marcus," I said softly. He didn't like that answer. He wanted me to be agitated. He wanted me to be the angry black man that fit the narrative he was building. Silence unnerved him. He opened my door and gripped my arm, guiding me toward the entrance as if I were a toddler learning to walk. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was empty, which was the first red flag. A good specialist has a 6-month waiting list. A corrupt doctor has empty chairs and immediate availability. We approached the reception desk. The woman behind the glass didn't look up from her phone. "Blackwood," Marcus announced. "Appointment at 11. She slid a clipboard across the counter without making eye contact. "Fill this out. Doctor will be with you shortly." I reached for the clipboard, but Marcus snatched it away. "I will do it," he said. His hand shakes. He can't write legibly. I sat in a plastic chair and watched my son commit fraud. He filled out my medical history. He checked yes for hallucinations. He checked yes for violent outbursts. He checked yes for inability to manage finances. He was writing a biography of a madman, and he was signing my name at the bottom. 10 minutes later, a heavy door opened. A man stepped out. Dr. Filsner looked exactly like the kind of expert witness who gets paid to say water isn't wet. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. His smile was practiced, exposing teeth that had been whitened to an unnatural shade of porcelain. "Mr. Blackwood?" he asked, looking at Marcus, not me. "That's me," Marcus said, standing up and shaking the doctor's hand vigorously. "And this is my father, Thaddeus." Filsner looked down at me. His eyes were cold, assessing. He wasn't looking for symptoms. He was looking for compliance. "Hello, Thaddeus," he said, using that condescending tone people reserve for children and pets. "Why don't you come on back? We have a nice, comfortable chair for you." I stood up slowly. I didn't smile. I walked past him into the office. The office was designed to intimidate. The desk was massive. The walls were lined with framed diplomas from universities I had never heard of. Filsner sat behind the desk, creating a physical barrier of authority. Marcus sat in the guest chair. I was directed to a soft, low sofa that made it difficult to sit upright. It was a subtle psychological trick. Put the patient in a physically lower position to induce submissiveness. "So, Marcus tells me you have been having some trouble lately," Filsner began, clicking a gold pen. "Confusion, aggression, wandering at night." I didn't answer. I looked at the bookshelf behind him. I noticed that the spines of the medical journals were unbroken. They were props. "Thaddeus?" Filsner pressed. "Did you hear me?" I looked at him. "I hear you perfectly, doctor. My hearing is excellent." Filsner exchanged a look with Marcus, a look that said, "Here we go." "Okay, let's try a simple baseline test," Filsner said, looking at his notes. "Do you know what year it is?" "It is 2024, I said. "Good. And do you know who the president is?" I named the president. Filsner frowned. This wasn't going according to the script. He needed failure. He needed dysfunction. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Thaddeus, Marcus is very worried about you. He says you have been claiming to hear people in your house. He says you write strange things in a notebook. Voices that aren't there. Languages that don't exist." I felt a spark of anger. Brittany had told him about the Latin. "I write in Latin, doctor," I said. "It is the language of the law." Filsner nodded slowly, writing something down. "Fixation on dead languages," he muttered, just loud enough for the microphone he was likely recording with. "And do these Latin phrases, Do they tell you to do things? Do you feel like you are a person of great importance? Maybe a judge? It was a trap. A crude, clumsy trap. If I said, I am a judge, he would label it a delusion of grandeur, ignoring the fact that it was literally my career for 40 years. If I denied it, I was denying my identity. I sat back. I decided it was time to testify. But I wouldn't testify in plain English. I would testify in the only language that mattered, precedent. I looked Filsner dead in the eye. A state cannot constitutionally confine without more a non-dangerous individual who is capable of surviving safely in freedom by himself, or with the help of willing and responsible family members or friends. Filsner stopped writing. He blinked. "Excuse me?" he asked. I continued, my voice gaining strength, quoting the syllabus of O'Connor versus Donaldson, 422 U.S. 563, the landmark Supreme Court ruling on involuntary commitment. The mere presence of mental illness does not disqualify a person from remaining in a free society. In short, a state cannot fence in the harmless mentally ill solely to save its citizens from exposure to those whose ways are different. Filsner stared at me. He didn't recognize the case. He didn't recognize the syntax of the Supreme Court. To his untrained, corrupt ear, it sounded like a man stringing together complex words in a random order. It sounded like word salad. He looked at Marcus. "Is this what he does at home?" Filsner asked. "This rambling?" Marcus nodded eagerly. "All the time, doctor. He just goes on and on like that. It doesn't make any sense. He thinks he is in a courtroom. He thinks he is ruling on cases." Filsner sighed, a theatrical sound, a professional burden. He scribbled furiously on his notepad. Patient exhibits disorganized speech, delusions of authority, inability to engage in linear conversation, dissociation from reality. He looked back at me. "Thaddeus, do you know where you are right now?" I smiled. It was a cold smile. "I am in a room where due process is being murdered, doctor." Filsner shook his head. "Okay, I think I have seen enough." He tore a sheet off his prescription pad. He handed it to Marcus. "This is a prescription for haloperidol. It is a strong antipsychotic. It will help with the chatter. It will calm him down. I want you to start him on it immediately." Marcus took the paper. His hands were shaking, but he took it. "And the report?" Marcus asked. "For the hearing tomorrow? I will have it ready by 5 o'clock, Filsner said, standing up. "I will certify that he is incapacitated. Based on his behavior today, the rambling, the delusions, the hostility, it is a clear case of advanced dementia with psychotic features. He needs a guardian. He cannot be left to manage his own affairs." "Thank you, doctor," Marcus said. "You are saving his life." Filsner walked around the desk. He patted me on the shoulder. "It is for the best, Thaddeus. You will feel much better once the medicine kicks in. No more voices, no more courtrooms in your head." I stood up. I looked at the diploma on the wall directly behind his head. University of Granada Online. I memorized the name on the degree. I memorized the date. "You are right, doctor," I said. "There will be no more courtrooms in my head. Because the next courtroom I stepped into would be very, very real." And Dr. Filsner, with his fake smile and his rubber-stamped diagnosis, had just signed his own indictment. He thought he was documenting my insanity. In reality, he was documenting his own malpractice. I walked to the door. Marcus followed, tucking the prescription into his pocket like a winning lottery ticket. As we walked back to the car, Marcus seemed lighter, happier. "See, Pop," he said, unlocking the car. "Dr. Filsner is a nice guy. He gets it." I looked at the sky. It was a brilliant, cloudless blue. "Yes, Marcus," I said. "He gets it." I got into the back seat of the BMW. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I let Marcus lock the child safety locks again. Let them have their victory lap. Let them think the old man is babbling nonsense. Because tomorrow, when I stood before a real judge, I wouldn't be quoting O'Connor versus Donaldson to a wall. I would be using it as a sword. And Dr. Filsner's report, claiming that a verbatim recitation of Supreme Court law was rambling gibberish, would be the funniest joke in legal history. I closed my eyes and let the car take me back to my prison. The evidence gathering was complete. Now, it was time to prepare the closing argument. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long bars of shadow across the room that felt disturbingly like the bars of a cell. My jailer, Nurse Stokes, was downstairs eating the lunch she had ordered on my credit card, leaving me alone for the first time in hours. But it was not solitude I was granted. It was a brief window of opportunity provided by the vanity of my daughter-in-law. Brittany had breezed into the room 10 minutes earlier, not to check on my vitals or offer me water, but to use the master bathroom. She claimed the lighting in there was better for fixing her makeup. She had tossed her iPad onto the nightstand next to my head, treating my prison cell like her personal dressing room. When she left to go shout at the housekeeper about a stain on the rug, she made a fatal error. She left the device behind. I stared at the iPad. It sat there in its pink leather case, a beacon of information in a sea of isolation. I knew I had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before she realized her mistake. I sat up. The dizziness from the morning sedative had faded to a dull throb, thanks to my sleight of hand with the pills. I reached out and grabbed the device. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the adrenaline of the theft. I pressed the home button. Enter passcode. I paused. A younger man might have panicked, but I have spent a lifetime analyzing the human mind. People are creatures of habit, and narcissists are the most predictable of all. Brittany was a woman obsessed with her status, her image, and her marriage to my son. She wouldn't use a random number. I tried the date of their wedding. Incorrect. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried the day she moved into my house. Incorrect. Then I remembered something Marcus had said years ago when they first started dating. He said she was obsessed with money, that she checked the stock market before she checked the weather. I typed in 0000. No. I typed in 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1. I closed my eyes and visualized her fingers. I had watched her unlock it yesterday. She had tapped the corners. Top left, top right, bottom left. 1, 3, 7, 9. It opened. I didn't waste time looking at her photos or her social media. I went straight to the mail app. In any investigation, you follow the paper trail. And in the modern world, the paper trail is digital. The inbox refreshed. And as the bold headers appeared on the screen, the blood drained from my face. It wasn't a correspondence log. It was a crime scene of financial negligence. Subject: urgent. Foreclosure notice. Final warning. Sender: Atlanta Federal Mortgage. I tapped it. The email outlined a debt of $400,000 on Marcus and Brittany's home. They hadn't paid their mortgage in 8 months. The bank was threatening to seize the property within 30 days. I swiped to the next email. Subject: margin call liquidation alert. Sender: Crypto Global Exchange. Your account has fallen below the maintenance margin requirements. Immediate deposit of $600,000 is required to prevent total liquidation of your position. $600,000. I kept scrolling. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Subject: outstanding marker notice. Sender: the Golden Palace Casino, Las Vegas. Mr. Blackwood, this is a final courtesy reminder regarding your outstanding marker of $250,000. Failure to remit payment by Friday will result in legal action and notification of credit bureaus. I did the math in my head. Mortgage, crypto losses, gambling debts, credit card balances that were maxed out to the limit. $2 million. My son and his wife were not just living beyond their means. They were drowning. They were buried under a mountain of debt so high it blocked out the sun. I sat back against the pillows, clutching the iPad to my chest. The revelation hit me harder than the betrayal itself. They weren't trying to declare me insane just to steal my money for a boat or a vacation. They were trying to declare me insane because I was their only life raft. They had leveraged their entire existence on risky bets and shallow appearances, and now the bill had come due. They needed my $5 million trust fund not to get rich, but to stay out of jail. I looked at the bedroom door. I imagined Marcus downstairs pacing, smoking cigarettes, terrified of the loan sharks and the bank managers. For a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, agonizing grief. I remembered Marcus as a boy. I remembered teaching him how to save his allowance. I remembered him crying when he lost a $5 bill I gave him for the movies. I told him then that money is just paper, but character is gold. Where had that boy gone? He had become a man who would drug his own father, a man who would imprison the person who gave him life just to cover his own mistakes. He was a coward, a weak, spineless coward, who would rather destroy his family than admit he had failed. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I am a judge. Judges cannot afford to cry over the defendants. We must look at the evidence. We must render a verdict. And the verdict was clear. My son was no longer my son. He was a hostile party. He was a financial predator. I looked down at the iPad. This information was my weapon, but I couldn't keep the device. Brittany would come back for it. I needed to preserve the record. I opened the browser. I navigated to a secure cloud storage site I had used during my time on the bench. It was an encrypted server I used to store sensitive case files, away from the prying eyes of clerks and interns. My fingers flew across the glass screen. Username, the hammer. Password. A string of characters only I knew. I logged in. I went back to the mail app. I selected every damning email, the foreclosure, the margin call, the casino marker. I forwarded them all to a burner email address I controlled, and then uploaded the screenshots directly to the cloud vault. Upload complete. Upload complete. Upload complete. I was systematically documenting the motive for their crime. In a court of law, proving the act is easy. Proving the intent is the hard part. But this was the smoking gun. This proved that the guardianship petition wasn't about my health. It was about their debt. I heard footsteps on the stairs, the click of heels. Brittany. I quickly closed the browser. I cleared the history. I closed the mail app. I wiped the screen on my pajama shirt, erasing my fingerprints. I placed the iPad back on the nightstand exactly at the angle she had left it. I slid back down under the covers. I slowed my breathing. I let my face go slack. The door opened. Brittany rushed in. She looked frantic. She went straight to the nightstand. She grabbed the iPad. She looked at me. I didn't move. I didn't twitch. She swiped the screen. She checked something, probably checking to see if it was still locked. It was. Thank God, she whispered. She looked at me with a sneer. Sleep tight, old man, she said. Enjoy the rest while you can, because tomorrow we are selling this dump. She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling. She thought she was holding a tablet. She didn't realize she was holding a subpoena. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. The grief was gone. The pity was gone. My son had made his bed. He had mortgaged his soul. And tomorrow, in open court, I was going to make sure he paid the full price. I closed my eyes and began to rehearse my opening statement. The evidence was secured. The witness list was ready. The hammer was raised, and God help anyone who stood in its way. The night before the trial was the longest night of my life. It was a suffocating waiting game played in the dark. My son and his wife believed they had won. They were already celebrating downstairs. I could hear the clink of glasses and the low murmur of their voices discussing which boat to buy and which renovations to start first. They were carving up the carcass of my life before I was even dead. At 9 o'clock, the door to my room opened. It wasn't the nurse this time. It was Brittany. She didn't bring food. She didn't bring water. She brought a brochure. She threw it onto the bed next to me. It was a glossy pamphlet for a facility called Shady Pines. I looked at it. The picture showed smiling seniors playing checkers, but I knew the place. I had sentenced a nursing home administrator from Shady Pines to 10 years for Medicare fraud back in '95. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where the state sent people who had no money and no family. Get comfortable with the idea, Thaddeus, she said, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of wine in her hand. Because after the judge signs the order tomorrow, this is your new address. We found you a bed in the ward. It is the cheapest one in the state, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had promised to love and cherish my son. You are enjoying this, Brittany, I said quietly. She smiled. It was a smile devoid of humanity. I am enjoying the silence, she said. I am enjoying the fact that for the first time in 10 years, I won't have to listen to your lectures, or your Latin phrases, or your judgment. You are finally going to be exactly where you belong, out of sight and out of mind. She turned off the light and closed the door. She locked it from the outside. I lay there in the dark. My heart was beating slow and steady. She thought she was sentencing me to prison. She didn't realize she had just given me the signal to execute the escape plan. I waited. I waited until the house went silent. I waited until the heavy footsteps of Nurse Stokes stopped pacing in the hallway and the snoring from the master suite down the hall began. It was 2 in the morning. I sat up. I reached into my pocket. My fingers curled around the plastic lighter I had stolen from Nurse Stokes' purse earlier that day. It was a cheap disposable lighter, but tonight it was the key to my freedom. I moved to the door. I used the paperclip technique again. It was faster this time. My hands knew the rhythm. Click, click, open. I stepped into the hallway. The air was still. The house was a tomb. I looked up at the ceiling. Directly above the staircase was the main smoke detector for the second floor. It was an older model. I knew it well because I had installed it myself 20 years ago. I knew that it was wired directly into the home security system. If that detector went off, it wouldn't just beep. It would trigger the whole house alarm. It would turn on the strobe lights. It would call the fire department. And most importantly, it would unlock the electronic deadbolts on the exterior doors as a safety failsafe. I needed height. I grabbed a heavy wooden chair from the hallway alcove. I dragged it silently to the center of the landing. I climbed up. My knees screamed in protest. I swayed for a moment, gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. I was 72 years old, and I was standing on a chair in the middle of the night, about to commit arson in my own home. I flicked the lighter. The flame danced in the darkness. I held it up to the sensor. I didn't touch the plastic. I just let the heat rise. I let the smoke from the flame curl into the vents. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The alarm didn't just sound, it screamed. A high-pitched electronic shriek that pierced the eardrums. The strobe lights mounted on the wall began to flash blinding white pulses of light. I jumped down from the chair and kicked it back into the alcove. Doors flew open. "Fire!" I screamed, my voice blending with the siren. "Fire! Everybody out!" I heard Brittany scream. I heard Marcus cursing. I heard Nurse Stokes stumbling out of the guest room. "Where is it?" Marcus yelled, running into the hallway in his boxers. "Where is the fire?" "It is in the attic," I shouted, pointing upward. "The roof is burning. Run!" Panic is a powerful drug. It overrides logic. In that moment, they didn't question why I was out of my room. They didn't question why they couldn't smell smoke. They just reacted to the noise and the lights and the fear. "Get the files!" Brittany screamed, pushing past Marcus. "Get the laptop!" "Forget the laptop!" Marcus yelled, grabbing her arm. "Get out!" They ran. They didn't look back for me. They didn't try to help the old invalid man down the stairs. They ran for their lives, leaving me behind to burn. That was the final confirmation I needed. If there had been a real fire, my son would have let me die. I watched them scramble down the stairs. I watched Nurse Stokes bulldoze past them, clutching her purse. I didn't follow them to the front door. I turned and walked calmly toward the back of the house. I moved through the kitchen. The alarm was still shrieking, the lights still flashing like a disco from hell. I reached the back door. The electronic lock was disengaged, just as I knew it would be. The safety override had worked. I opened the door and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit my face. It smelled of rain and pine needles. It smelled of freedom. I walked across the patio past the pool where Marcus had planned to park his new boat. I opened the garden gate and stepped onto the quiet service road that ran behind our property. I looked left. Nothing. I looked right. A pair of headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness. A car idled about 50 yards away. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't an ambulance. It was a long black Lincoln Town car, the kind they stopped making 10 years ago because they were too heavy and used too much gas. The kind of car that commanded respect. I walked toward it. My cane tapped a steady rhythm on the asphalt. I didn't look back at the house. I could hear the distant wail of fire trucks approaching. I could hear Brittany screaming on the front lawn. I reached the car. The back door swung open. I slid onto the plush leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive cigars and old leather. The door closed with a solid, heavy thunk, shutting out the noise of the alarm, shutting out the betrayal, shutting out the life I was leaving behind. The man in the seat next to me shifted. He was wearing a trench coat over his pajamas. His white hair was messy, but his eyes were sharp. Senator William Jenkins looked at me. He looked at my pajamas. He looked at the lighter I was still clutching in my hand. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just reached into a cooler on the floor and pulled out 2 cold bottles of root beer. He cracked one open and handed it to me. "Hello, Judge," he said, his voice raspy with sleep but warm with friendship. "Long time no see." I took the bottle. I took a long drink. The cold carbonation burned my throat in the best possible way. "Hello, Bill," I said. "You are parked in a tow zone." Jenkins laughed, a deep belly laugh that filled the car. "Let them try to tow a United States senator," he said. He tapped the glass partition. "Driver, get us out of here. We have a court case to win." The car pulled away, gliding silently into the night. I watched my house disappear in the rearview mirror. I watched the flashing lights of the fire trucks arrive to save a house that was already empty of anything that mattered. I settled back into the seat. I was tired. My body ached, but my mind was razor sharp. "Where to?" Judge Jenkins asked. "My guest house is open." "No," I said. "Take me to the office. I need a suit, I need a shave, and I need to review the case law." Jenkins smiled. "The hammer is back," he said. "Yes," I whispered, looking out at the passing streetlights. "The hammer is back, and tomorrow I am going to bring the whole house down." The morning sun cut through the tall, narrow windows of the Fulton County Courthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny suspended judgments. The courtroom smelled of floor wax, old wood, and the nervous sweat of people whose lives were about to be dismantled. It was a smell I knew better than the scent of my own home. For 40 years I had sat on the raised bench, looking down at the drama unfolding below. But today the perspective was going to be very different. At 8:45 in the morning, my son Marcus and his wife Brittany walked through the double doors. They looked like they were attending a coronation, not a competency hearing. Marcus was wearing a navy blue bespoke suit that I knew for a fact he had charged to a credit card that was already over its limit. His hair was gelled back in a style that screamed Wall Street, but his eyes darted around the room with the anxious energy of a gambler who has put his last chip on red. Brittany walked beside him, clutching his arm. She had dressed for the part of the grieving, concerned daughter-in-law. She wore a modest gray dress and a string of pearls that I recognized as costume jewelry. She had even worn minimal makeup, trying to look pale and exhausted, as if caring for a senile old man had drained the life out of her. It was a performance, a bad one, but she was committed to the role. Trailing behind them was their lawyer, Ambrose Chadwick. I knew Chadwick by reputation. In the legal community of Atlanta, he was known as a bottom feeder. He was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances and advertised on late-night television, promising quick cash settlements for whiplash. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that was too wide. He carried a briefcase that looked empty, probably because his legal arguments usually were. They walked to the plaintiff's table and set up their command center. Chadwick spread out his papers with theatrical importance. Marcus placed a bottle of water on the table, his hand shaking slightly. Brittany pulled out a tissue and dabbed at dry eyes, preparing her tears for the judge. They looked around the room. The defendant's table was empty. "Where is he?" Marcus whispered loud enough for the court reporter to look up from her machine. "I don't see him," Brittany hissed back, scanning the gallery. "Do you think he is still running?" "He has to be," Marcus said, checking his Rolex. "After he set off the fire alarm last night, he just vanished. The police couldn't find him. He is probably wandering down Peachtree Street in his pajamas talking to a lamppost." Chadwick chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "That is perfect," he said, his voice oily and smooth. "That is exactly what we want. If he is a no-show, it is a default judgment. We tell the judge he fled the house in a delusional state. It proves he is a danger to himself. We will have the guardianship signed by lunch." Brittany smiled, and it was the ugly, triumphant smile she usually hid behind her social media filters. "By lunch," she repeated. "That means we can list the house this afternoon. I already called the realtor." They sat there, basking in their premature victory. They were so confident, so arrogant, that they didn't notice the atmosphere in the room was shifting. They didn't notice the bailiff standing by the door, checking his watch, not with boredom, but with anticipation. They didn't notice that the clerk was organizing the files with a precision that suggested a serious trial, not a rubber stamp hearing. At 8:55, the court clerk, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, stood up. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the trio of vultures. "Counsel," she said, her voice cutting through their whispering. "Is the petitioner ready to proceed?" Chadwick stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We are ready, Your Honor, or rather, Madam Clerk," he said, correcting himself with a smirk. "However, It appears the defendant, Mr. Thaddeus Blackwood, is absent. Given his medical condition and his flight from his home last night, we move to proceed in absentia. We ask for an immediate default ruling on the grounds of incapacitation. He looked at Marcus and winked. It was a done deal. Easy money. Mrs. Higgins didn't blink. She looked at her computer screen, then back at Chadwick. There will be no default ruling, Mr. Chadwick, she said calmly. The defendant has filed an entry of appearance. Chadwick froze. His smile faltered. Excuse me, he asked. He filed an appearance. When? Electronic filing received at 4 a.m. this morning, Mrs. Higgins stated. Along with a motion to dismiss and a counter-petition for emergency relief, the defendant has indicated he will be representing himself pro se. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus looked at Brittany. Brittany looked at Chadwick. Pro se, Marcus whispered. What does that mean? It means he is his own lawyer, Chadwick snapped, his face flushing red. But that is impossible. He is senile. He thinks he is talking to aliens. Who helped him file a motion at 4 in the morning? Maybe he hired someone, Brittany suggested, her voice rising in panic. But we took his wallet. We took his phone. How could he hire a lawyer? He didn't hire a lawyer, Mrs. Higgins corrected, her tone icy. As I said, he is representing himself. And the filing indicates he will be present, Brittany laughed. It was a sharp, nervous sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Representing himself, she scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard it looked painful. That is a joke. The man can't even use the microwave without asking for help. He doesn't even know how to use an iPhone. How is he going to represent himself in a court of law? Chadwick regained his composure. He waved a hand dismissively. It doesn't matter, he said to his clients. Let him try. It will be a disaster for him. Imagine a confused old man rambling about the government and aliens in front of a judge. It will just prove our case faster. If he shows up babbling in his pajamas, the judge will commit him on the spot. Marcus relaxed his shoulders, dropping. You are right, he said. This is good. Let him make a fool of himself. They settled back into their chairs, their confidence restored. They checked their phones. They whispered about dinner plans. They treated the courtroom like a waiting room for a bank loan. They didn't look at the clock. It was 8:59. The side door near the bench opened, but it wasn't the judge. It was the bailiff. All rise, the bailiff shouted, his voice booming like a cannon shot. The Honorable Judge Sarah Stone presiding. Everyone stood up. Marcus smoothed his tie. Brittany clasped her hands in fake prayer. Chadwick puffed out his chest. Judge Stone walked in. She was a sharp, intelligent woman in her late 40s, with eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat at the bench, her black robe flowing around her like the wings of a crow. She looked at the docket. Then she looked at the plaintiff's table. Good morning, she said. We are here in the matter of the guardianship of Thaddeus Blackwood. Good morning, Your Honor, Chadwick said, bowing slightly. We are ready to proceed. As you can see, the defendant is not. Before he could finish the sentence, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It wasn't a hesitant opening. It wasn't the fumbling entrance of a confused old man. The doors were pushed open with force, with purpose. Click, click, click. The sound of hard leather shoes on the marble floor echoed through the silent room. It was a rhythm, a cadence, the march of a soldier going to war. Marcus turned around. Brittany turned around. Chadwick turned around, and their mouths fell open. I wasn't wearing pajamas. I wasn't wearing the stained flannel shirt they were used to seeing me in. I was wearing my charcoal gray Armani suit, the one I had worn to my retirement ceremony. It was pressed crisp and tailored to perfection. My white shirt was starched stiff. My silk tie was a deep crimson, the color of blood and authority. I was clean-shaven, my face sharp and focused. I didn't have my cane. I didn't need it. I stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, my spine straight, my shoulders back. I carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a stack of files in the other. I walked down the center aisle. I didn't look at the gallery. I didn't look at the bailiff. I kept my eyes fixed on the bench. As I passed the plaintiff's table, I heard Marcus make a sound, a snort, a derisive, dismissive sound. He turned to Brittany and I heard him whisper, "Look at him. He is playing dress-up. He thinks he is going to work." Brittany rolled her eyes again, leaning back in her chair with a look of utter boredom. "This is going to be sad," she whispered back. They were so blind. They were so wrapped up in their own narrative of my decline that they couldn't see the predator walking right past them. They saw a costume. They didn't see the armor. I reached the defendant's table. I set my briefcase down with a solid thud. I arranged my files. I took out my gold Mont Blanc pen and placed it parallel to the edge of the table. Then I looked up. Judge Stone was staring at me. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hand was frozen halfway to her water glass. She squinted as if she couldn't believe what her eyes were telling her. Her glasses slipped down her nose. She leaned forward toward the microphone. Her voice was a whisper, a breath of shock that was amplified across the silent room. "My God," she said. "Is that Justice Blackwood?" The name hung in the air. Marcus frowned. He leaned toward Brittany. "Who is Justice Blackwood?" he asked. I turned slowly to face them. I looked at my son. I looked at his wife. I looked at their cheap lawyer. I adjusted my tie. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "I am the man who is about to teach you that the law is a jealous mistress," I thought, "and she doesn't take kindly to people who abuse her." "Good morning, Your Honor," I said, my voice deep, resonant, and filling every corner of the room without a microphone. Thaddeus Blackwood, appearing pro se, ready for trial. The hammer had arrived, and the nails were waiting. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B swung open with a groan that sounded like history waking up. I did not rush. I did not stumble. I stepped across the threshold with the deliberate cadence of a man who knows that the ground beneath his feet belongs to him. For 48 hours, I had been a prisoner. I had been a patient. I had been a victim. But as I crossed that line from the hallway into the gallery, the transformation was complete. Thaddeus, the confused old man, was gone. In his place stood the hammer. I was wearing my charcoal Armani suit. It was 6 years old, but it had been tailored in Milan, and it fit me like a second skin. The fabric was heavy wool, screaming authority. My shirt was starched so stiff it could stand on its own. My tie was a deep blood-red silk tied in a perfect Windsor knot. I had polished my black Oxfords until they shone like obsidian mirrors. I carried my leather briefcase in my left hand and my files in my right. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence you find in a library or a crypt. I walked down the center aisle. Click, click, click. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythmic military precision. I kept my chin up. My eyes were fixed straight ahead on the bench. I did not look at the gallery where a few bored spectators sat. I did not look at the bailiff who was leaning against the wall chewing gum. I walked past the bar, the wooden railing that separates the spectators from the participants. I pushed the small swinging gate open. Click. I approached the tables. To my left sat the plaintiffs, my family, the people who had drugged me, lied to me, and tried to erase me. As I passed them, time seemed to slow down. Marcus was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, as if he were at a sports bar. He saw me. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look ashamed. He laughed. It was a snort, really, a short, ugly sound of derision that echoed in the quiet room. He turned to Brittany and whispered loud enough for me and half the room to hear. "Look at him. He is playing dress-up. He thinks he is going to work. God, this is pathetic." Brittany sat beside him. She looked at me. She looked at the suit. She looked at the briefcase. And then she did something that I will remember for the rest of my life. She rolled her eyes. It was a slow, exaggerated motion. She tilted her head back, sighed, and let her eyes roll up toward the ceiling, as if my very existence was an exhausting inconvenience to her schedule. "He is trying so hard," she whispered back. "It is sad, really. He probably thinks he is Perry Mason. Just ignore him, babe. The judge will see through the costume in 5 minutes." They were so confident. They were so blinded by their own narrative that they couldn't see the truth standing 3 feet away from them. They thought I was a senile old man playing pretend. They didn't realize that for me, the suit wasn't a costume. It was a uniform. I ignored them. I did not turn my head. I did not acknowledge their insults. A lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep. I walked to the defendant's table. It was empty. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light falling across the wood. I set my briefcase down. Thud. I placed my files on the table. Snap. I pulled out my chair and sat down. I sat with my spine straight, my hands clasped on the table in front of me. I looked up at the bench. The judge was reading a file. Her head was down. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was flipping through the motion I had filed at 4 in the morning. Docket number 24C V 1988. She read aloud, her voice professional and detached. In the matter of the guardianship of Thaddeus Blackwood, the court acknowledges the presence of the petitioner, Marcus Blackwood, and his counsel, Mr. Chadwick. She paused. She turned a page. And the court acknowledges the entry of appearance by the defendant. She stopped. She stared at the paper. She blinked. She moved her finger across the line of text as if checking for a typo. Thaddeus Blackwood, she murmured. She looked up. For a moment she just looked at the suit. She looked at the tie. She looked at the posture. Then she looked at my face. I saw the recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened behind her glasses. Her mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale. Her hand, which had been reaching for her gavel, froze in midair. Her glasses slipped down her nose, and she didn't bother to push them back up. Sarah Stone. I remembered her. 20 years ago, she was a bright-eyed intern from Emory Law School. She had clerked for me during the United States versus Cartel del Sol trials. I had taught her how to write a dissenting opinion. I had taught her that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. I had written her recommendation letter for the bench. She was looking at me now not as a judge looks at a defendant, but as a student looks at a master. She leaned forward toward the microphone. Her voice trembled. "Justice Blackwood," she whispered. The words were soft, but in the acoustically perfect courtroom, they sounded like a thunderclap. The room went deadly silent. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys. The bailiff, who had been chewing gum, stopped chewing and stood up straighter, his hand instinctively going to his belt. Marcus frowned. He leaned closer to Brittany. "What did she call him?" he whispered. "Justice Blackwood. Who is that?" Brittany shrugged, still bored. "I don't know. Maybe she is confused. He probably told her he was a justice in his delusions." But at the other end of the plaintiff's table, the reaction was very different. Chadwick, the slimy lawyer who had been grinning a moment ago, went rigid. He knew the name. Every lawyer in the state of Georgia knew the name. Justice Thaddeus Blackwood. The Hammer. The man who had reshaped the penal code of the 11th Circuit. The man whose portrait hung in the lobby of the very building we were sitting in. Chadwick's face turned the color of old oatmeal. He looked at the judge. He looked at me. He looked at the file in front of him, which claimed I was a senile, incompetent invalid. His hand shook. The expensive fountain pen he was holding slipped from his sweaty fingers. Clatter. It hit the table and rolled onto the floor, breaking the silence. Judge Stone didn't look at Chadwick. She couldn't take her eyes off me. "Justice Blackwood," she repeated, her voice stronger this time but filled with disbelief. "Sir, are you the defendant in this matter?" I looked at her. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a greeting from one jurist to another. "Good morning, Your Honor," I said. My voice was deep, calm, and resonated from the diaphragm, just as I had trained myself to speak decades ago. "Yes, Judge Stone, I am the defendant, Thaddeus Blackwood, appearing pro se." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "And I am ready for trial." Judge Stone swallowed hard. She took off her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at the plaintiff's table. She looked at Marcus, who was looking confused. She looked at Brittany, who was checking her cuticles, and she looked at Chadwick, who looked like he was about to vomit. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Chadwick," she said, her voice icy, "do you know who this man is?" Chadwick stood up, his knees knocked against the table. Your Honor." Marcus stood up, interrupting him. "He is my father, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice full of fake sorrow. "And as you can see, he is suffering from delusions of grandeur. He thinks he is a judge. He put on that suit this morning and—" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," Judge Stone barked. It was a command that made Marcus jump. She turned her gaze back to me. There was respect in her eyes, deep, profound respect. "Justice Blackwood," she said, "the court is honored by your presence, although, I must admit, the circumstances are unexpected." "The circumstances are criminal, Your Honor," I corrected gently. "But we will get to that." Marcus looked at Brittany. His face was starting to crumple. The arrogance was cracking. Why is she calling him Justice? He hissed. Why is she talking to him like that? Because, you idiot, Chadwick whispered harshly, leaning across the table, his face wet with sweat. Your father isn't just a retired old man. He is a federal legend. What? Marcus asked. He is the Hammer, Chadwick hissed. We are suing the Hammer. Brittany stopped rolling her eyes. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw the dawn of fear. I sat back in my chair. I unbuttoned my jacket. I placed my hands on the table. I looked at my son. I looked at his wife. The snickering was gone. The eye-rolling was gone. The trial hadn't even started, and I had already won the opening argument. I looked up at Judge Stone. Shall we proceed, Your Honor? I asked. She nodded, slowly picking up her gavel. We shall, she said. She slammed the gavel down. Bang! The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. It was the sound of the trap snapping shut, and my family was standing right in the middle of it. The whisper traveled across the quiet courtroom like a draft of cold air. Who is Justice Blackwood? My son Marcus asked this question with genuine confusion. He leaned toward his lawyer, his eyebrows knitted together, looking at the man he had called Dad for 35 years as if I were a stranger. And in that moment, I realized the depth of the tragedy. It wasn't just that he was greedy, it was that he was completely ignorant. He had grown up in my house, eaten at my table, and spent my money, but he had never bothered to ask what I actually did all those days I put on a robe and went to the city. To him, I was just the ATM. To him, I was just the old man who paid for the private schools and the cars. He didn't know the legend because he never cared to read the book. Chadwick the lawyer knew. He was sweating now. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that looked expensive, but was probably polyester. He leaned in and whispered frantically to Marcus. Shut up. Just shut up. Your father is a federal judge, a retired federal judge. Marcus blinked. A judge, he whispered back. I thought he worked for the government, like a clerk or something. Brittany let out a huff of air. Great, she muttered. So he has friends. That is why the judge is staring at him. It is the good old boys club. Judge Sarah Stone cleared her throat. She composed herself, placing her glasses back on her nose. She looked at me with a mixture of professional duty and personal affection. Justice Blackwood, she began, her voice steady but formal. Before we proceed, I must make a disclosure for the record. 20 years ago, I served as a judicial law clerk in your chambers. You were my mentor. You signed my recommendation for the bench. She paused, looking at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Chadwick, given this prior relationship, there is a potential conflict of interest. If I proceed, it could be grounds for a mistrial or an appeal. I am prepared to recuse myself and transfer this case to Judge Holloway in Courtroom 6. Chadwick's eyes lit up. This was his lifeline. This was his escape hatch. If he could move the case to a new judge, one who didn't know me, one who hadn't learned the law at my feet, he might still have a chance to railroad the senile old man. Yes, Your Honor, Chadwick stammered, standing up too quickly. We absolutely move for recusal. The bias here is evident. We cannot expect a fair hearing when the defendant was the presiding judge's boss. We demand a transfer immediately. Marcus nodded vigorously. Yes, transfer. New judge. Judge Stone looked at me. She was giving me an out too. She was offering me a delay. Justice Blackwood, she asked, do you have any objection to the recusal? I stood up. I didn't need to lean on the table. I stood tall. I adjusted my cuffs. Your Honor, I said, my voice filling the room. While I appreciate the court's diligence regarding ethical canons, specifically Title 28, United States Code Section 455, I must oppose the motion to transfer. Chadwick's jaw dropped. What he blurted out. Why would he oppose it? I ignored him. I spoke only to the bench. I oppose it for two reasons, Your Honor. First, a transfer would cause a delay of at least 30 days. My son and his wife have filed an emergency petition alleging that I am in imminent danger. If their claims are true, then a delay puts me at risk. If their claims are false, then a delay keeps me prisoner in a legal limbo that violates my due process rights. I took a step forward. And second, I said, locking eyes with Stone, I taught you the law, Sarah. I taught you that justice is blind. I taught you that facts do not care about friendships. I have absolute confidence in your ability to be impartial. Unless you feel you cannot look at the evidence objectively, I demand we proceed. Right here, right now. I wanted this. I didn't want a stranger in courtroom 6. I wanted Sarah Stone. I wanted her to see what they had done to me. I wanted the humiliation of my family to happen in front of someone who knew exactly who I was. Judge Stone looked at me for a long moment. She saw the challenge in my eyes. She saw the hammer. She nodded. The court accepts the defendant's waiver, she ruled. The motion for recusal is denied. We will proceed. Chadwick slumped back into his chair. He looked like a man who had just watched the last lifeboat leave the Titanic. Mr. Chadwick, Judge Stone said, her voice hardening, call your first witness, or present your evidence. Chadwick stood up. He was flustered. He shuffled his papers. He wasn't ready for a fight. He was ready for a surrender. Yes, Your Honor. We have an affidavit. He pulled out the paper Marcus had bought from Dr. Filsner yesterday. Your Honor, we present a sworn affidavit from Dr. Gerald Filsner, a renowned psychiatrist. This document certifies that Mr. Blackwood suffers from advanced dementia, paranoia, and psychosis. It states clearly that he is unable to care for himself. He marched toward the bench, holding the paper out like a weapon. I waited. I let him get 3 steps. Objection, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the table. I just said the word with the weight of 40 years of authority. Chadwick stopped. He turned to look at me. Objection, he asked. To what? It is a medical report. I addressed the judge. Your Honor, I object to the admission of this document under Federal Rule of Evidence 801 and 802. This is hearsay. Hearsay, Chadwick sputtered. It is an affidavit. It is an out-of-court statement offered for the truth of the matter asserted, I continued calmly. Dr. Filsner is not present in this courtroom. I cannot cross-examine a piece of paper. I cannot ask the paper about the doctor's credentials. I cannot ask the paper why the exam lasted only 10 minutes. I cannot ask the paper how much my son paid for this diagnosis. I looked at Chadwick. Unless you have Dr. Filsner hiding in your briefcase, Mr. Chadwick, this document is inadmissible. It violates my Sixth Amendment right to confront my accuser. Chadwick turned red. But this is a competency hearing. These are standard. We didn't bring the doctor because of the cost. Cost is not an exception to the hearsay rule, I said. Judge Stone looked at the paper in Chadwick's hand. Sustained, she said. The affidavit is excluded. Do you have the doctor available to testify, Mr. Chadwick? Chadwick looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor. No, Your Honor, Chadwick whispered. Then move on, Judge Stone ordered. Chadwick walked back to his table. He looked defeated, but Brittany nudged him. She whispered something violently in his ear. She pointed to a bag under the table. Chadwick brightened. Your Honor, he said, even without the doctor, we have physical evidence of the defendant's insanity. He reached into the bag and pulled out my black moleskin notebook, the one I used for my legal treatises. We seized this from the defendant's room, he said, holding it up. It is filled with ramblings, pages and pages of incoherent scrawls, made-up words. He speaks to invisible people in a language that doesn't exist. It proves his mind is gone. He walked toward the bench again, confident this time. Here, Your Honor. See for yourself. It is gibberish. I stood up again. Objection, I said. Chadwick spun around. Oh, come on. You can't object to your own notebook. I object to the characterization of the evidence, I said. Counsel is testifying. He is claiming the contents are gibberish and made-up words. I looked at Judge Stone. Your Honor, Mr. Chadwick is establishing a claim based on his own linguistic ignorance, lack of foundation. Unless Mr. Chadwick is an expert in classical languages, he is not qualified to determine if the text is coherent or not. Judge Stone held out her hand. Let me see the notebook, Mr. Chadwick. Chadwick handed it to her. She opened it. She adjusted her glasses. She read the first page, then the second. A small smile touched her lips. Mr. Chadwick, she asked, looking over the rim of her glasses, did you study Latin in law school? Chadwick blinked. Latin? No. Who studies Latin anymore? Justice Blackwood does, apparently, Judge Stone said. This isn't gibberish, Mr. Chadwick. This is a treatise on the application of habeas corpus in the post-9/11 era. And the handwriting, while shorthand, is perfectly legible to anyone who knows legal terminology. She read aloud. Nemo est supra leges. No one is above the law. She looked at Marcus. Your father isn't writing to aliens, Mr. Blackwood. He is writing to history. She closed the book and handed it back to the bailiff. Objection sustained. The evidence does not support the claim of insanity. In fact, it supports a claim of high intellectual functioning. Brittany slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous, she hissed. He is tricking you. He is crazy. I live with him. I know. Control your client, Mr. Chadwick, Judge Stone warned. I sat down. I smoothed my tie. Chadwick was trembling. He had lost the doctor. He had lost the notebook. He had nothing left but his own clients. I have no further evidence at this time, Your Honor, Chadwick whispered. I smiled. Then, Your Honor, I said, standing up. The defense moves for a directed verdict of dismissal. The plaintiff has failed to meet the burden of proof. There is not a scintilla of evidence that I am incompetent. In fact, the only incompetence displayed in this courtroom today belongs to the man standing at the plaintiff's table. Chadwick looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. Marcus looked like he was about to cry. Brittany looked like she wanted to kill me. But I wasn't done. However, I continued raising a finger. Before you rule on the dismissal, Your Honor, I have a cross motion to present. And unlike Mr. Chadwick, I brought my evidence. I reached for my briefcase. I unlocked the clasps. Click, click. The sound was loud in the silent room. I am not just asking for a dismissal, I said, pulling out the iPad I had stolen from Brittany. I am asking for an indictment. I turned the iPad on. I looked at Brittany. Her eyes went wide as she recognized the pink case. You didn't think I was just sleeping, did you, my dear? I asked softly. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A, a digital archive of financial records that will explain exactly why my son is so desperate to lock me away. The hammer was swinging, and it was coming down hard. Your Honor, I would like to call a hostile witness to the stand. Chadwick looked confused. He checked his empty witness list. He looked at Marcus, who shrugged. They didn't have any witnesses present because they thought this would be a 5-minute administrative hearing. They thought I wouldn't show up, but they forgot that in a game of chess, you don't just protect your king, you anticipate the opponent's moves 3 turns ahead. I call Dr. Gerald Filzner, I announced, turning toward the gallery. The heavy oak doors opened, and the bailiff escorted a very surprised Dr. Filzner into the courtroom. I had subpoenaed him electronically at 4 in the morning, along with my other motions. The U.S. Marshals had served him while he was eating his breakfast bagel. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked, and he was clutching his briefcase like a shield. He walked past Marcus and Brittany, giving them a look of pure panic, before taking his seat in the witness box. He swore to tell the truth, a promise I knew he had no intention of keeping. I walked to the podium. I placed my hands on the wood. I stared at him until he squirmed in his chair. Dr. Filzner, I began, my voice low and smooth. You are the medical professional who signed the emergency affidavit declaring me incompetent. Is that correct? Filzner cleared his throat. He adjusted the microphone. Yes, Mr. Blackwood, that is correct. In my professional opinion, you are suffering from acute cognitive decline. And you base this opinion on a thorough examination? I asked. Yes, extensive. I picked up a piece of paper from my table. Doctor, let us discuss your qualifications. You list your medical degree from the University of Granada. Yes, Filzner said, straightening his spine. A fine institution. The online program, I clarified. The one that requires no physical residency and allows students to take exams open book. Filzner flushed pink. It is an accredited program, he snapped. I am sure it is, I said dismissively. And your doctoral thesis? I looked it up in the medical archives last night. The title was The Psychological Impact of Paint Color on Waiting Room Anxiety. Is that correct? Filzner shifted in his seat. It is a valid field of study. Environmental psychology is very important. I am sure choosing between eggshell and beige is riveting work, doctor. But let us move on to your clinical experience, specifically the year 2018. Filzner went rigid. His eyes darted to Chadwick, silently begging for an objection. But Chadwick was slumped in his chair, defeated. He knew he couldn't object to facts. In 2018, I continued walking closer to the witness box. Were you not suspended by the Georgia Medical Board for 6 months? Filzner licked his dry lips. That was... That was a misunderstanding, an administrative error. An error, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. The board called it gross negligence. Specifically, you were found guilty of prescribing heavy antipsychotics to elderly patients without proper evaluation, simply to make them docile for nursing home staff. In the industry, they call it a chemical lobotomy. Is that the error you are referring to? Objection, Chadwick squeaked, finally standing up. Relevance. It goes to credibility, Your Honor, I said without looking at him. This doctor has a history of drugging old men for profit. Overruled. Judge Stone said, her eyes hard as flint as she looked at Filzner. Answer the question, doctor. Filzner wiped sweat from his upper lip. I was reinstated, he muttered. My license is valid. For now, I said. I walked back to my table. I picked up the affidavit he had signed for Marcus. Let's look at your report on me, doctor. You wrote here, quote, the patient exhibits disorganized speech and speaks in gibberish. You also noted delusions of authority. You claimed that when you asked me simple questions, I responded with incoherent rambling. Is that your testimony today, under oath? Filzner regained some confidence. This was his turf. He could lie about a private conversation. Yes, he said, nodding vigorously. You were nonsensical, Mr. Blackwood. You were stringing words together that had no meaning. You didn't know where you were. You were speaking a word salad. It was a clear sign of Broca's aphasia and dementia. You are certain it was nonsense? I pressed. 100%, Filzner said, smiling smugly at the judge. It was sad, really. A mind completely gone. I smiled back at him. It was the smile of a hunter who has just heard the trap snap shut. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the gold Mont Blanc pen. Filzner frowned, looking at the pen. Doctor, I said, holding it up. Do you know what this is? It is a pen, he said. It is a dictaphone, I corrected. High-fidelity audio recording, active noise cancellation. And yesterday, when I sat in your office, I had it clipped to my shirt pocket. Filzner's face turned the color of ash. Marcus gasped audibly. Brittany put her hand over her mouth. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, I explained to the courtroom. And since I was a party to the conversation, the recording is admissible. I walked to the microphone. I pressed the playback button. The audio was crisp and clear. It boomed through the courtroom speakers. First came Filzner's voice, condescending and oily. Thaddeus, do you know where you are right now? Then came my voice, strong, articulate, sharp. I am in a room where due process is being murdered, doctor. Then the sound of me quoting the law. A state cannot constitutionally confine without more a non-dangerous individual who is capable of surviving safely in freedom. O'Connor versus Donaldson. I let it play. I let the entire courtroom hear me recite the Supreme Court ruling, word for perfect word. I let them hear Filzner interrupting me, calling it rambling. I let them hear him prescribe haloperidol to shut me up. I clicked the pen off. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. I looked at Filzner. He was trembling so badly his teeth were chattering. Doctor, I said, my voice soft but deadly. You testified under oath that I was speaking gibberish. You testified that I didn't know where I was. But the recording shows I was quoting United States Supreme Court case law regarding the civil rights of the involuntary committed. I leaned over the railing, my face inches from his. Tell me, doctor, is the Supreme Court gibberish to you? Is the Constitution word salad? Filzner opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish dying on a dock. I turned to Judge Stone. Your Honor, I said, gesturing to the sweating man in the box. If quoting the 14th Amendment is a sign of mental illness, then I submit that this entire courthouse should be hospitalized immediately, because that gibberish is the very foundation of the job you and I swore to do. Judge Stone looked at Filzner. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated fury. She didn't look like a judge anymore. She looked like an executioner. Dr. Filzner, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, you have just committed perjury in my courtroom. You have falsified medical records to strip a citizen of his rights, and you have insulted the intelligence of this bench. She turned to the bailiff. Deputy, take Dr. Filzner into custody. I am holding him in contempt of court, and send a copy of this recording to the district attorney and the state medical board. I want his license revoked before lunch. No, Filzner screamed as the bailiff grabbed his arm. I didn't know. They told me he was crazy. Marcus told me. He pointed a shaking finger at the plaintiff's table. He told me to do it. He paid me $5,000 cash to write that report. He said the old man was a vegetable. The courtroom erupted. Marcus jumped up, knocking his chair over. "You liar!" Marcus shouted, his face purple. "I never paid you." Brittany grabbed Marcus's arm, trying to pull him down. "Shut up, you idiot! Shut up!" Judge Stone banged her gavel. "Order! Order in this court!" But the damage was done. The dominoes were falling. Filsner was being dragged out, kicking and screaming. Marcus was standing there, exposing his own guilt. And I stood in the center of the storm, calm and untouched. I looked at my son. He was breathing hard, staring at the door where the doctor had just vanished. He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see a father. He saw the prosecutor. I walked back to my table. I sat down. I arranged my papers. I wasn't done. The doctor was just the pawn. Now it was time to take the queen. I looked at Brittany. She was pale, staring at her hands. She knew she was next. "Your Honor," I said as the noise died down, "the defense calls Brittany Blackwood to the stand." The air in the room grew cold again. The hammer was swinging back for the second strike, and this one was going to be personal. The witness stand looked too small for a woman with an ego as large as Brittany Blackwood. She walked up the steps with a calculated frailty, her hand clutching a lace handkerchief, her eyes downcast, as if the weight of the world were on her shoulders. She took the oath with a trembling voice, a performance that would have won an Oscar if the audience didn't already know she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. She sat down and looked at the judge with a watery gaze. "I am just so heartbroken, Your Honor," she began, her voice a soft, manufactured quiver. "We only ever wanted to protect Thaddeus. He was like a father to me. Seeing him lose his mind, seeing him become so hostile, it has been the most painful experience of my marriage. We were trying to save him from himself." I stood at the podium and watched her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, analytical precision of a surgeon about to remove a tumor. "Brittany," I said, my voice echoing through the silent chamber, "you say you wanted to protect me. You say you cared for me like a daughter." "I did," she whispered, dabbing at her dry eyes. "Then perhaps you can explain your activities on the night of October 10th, I said, 3 days before you filed this petition." Brittany stiffened. "October 10th? I was at home. I was probably making you tea, Thaddeus." I turned to the clerk. "Your Honor, I would like to present Defense Exhibit B." I hit a button on my laptop, and the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The image was grainy, black and white, but the subjects were unmistakable. It was the interior of my study, my private sanctuary. The timestamp showed 2 a.m. The door to the study opened on the screen. Brittany walked in. She wasn't wearing the modest gray dress she had on today. She was in a silk robe, and her face wasn't sad. It was hungry. She went straight to the painting behind my desk, the portrait of my late wife, Eleanor. She swung the painting aside, revealing the wall safe. The courtroom gasped. Marcus turned a shade of white I didn't know was possible. On the video, Brittany was punching numbers into the keypad. When it didn't open, she began to kick the wall. She turned toward the camera, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Open, you stupid piece of junk," she screamed on the audio. "Open up, you old fossil. I know the money is in here. Die already, you ancient piece of trash. Just die and let us have what is ours." She began to spit on the desk, throwing my law books across the room in a tantrum that looked like something out of a horror movie. I paused the video on her face. Her eyes were wide, her mouth twisted in a snarl. "Is that the daughterly love you were referring to, Brittany?" I asked. "The part where you call me an ancient piece of trash while trying to break into my safe?" Brittany was frozen. The handkerchief was gripped so tight in her hand, it looked like it would tear. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. That is a deep fake," Brittany suddenly shrieked, her voice losing its soft edge and turning into a jagged blade. "He is a judge. He knows people. He had that video edited to make me look bad. He is a tech genius. It is all fake. Your Honor, he is manipulating the evidence." Judge Stone didn't even look at her. She was staring at the screen with an expression of profound disgust. "I am a retired judge, Brittany," I said calmly. "I don't need to fake the truth. The truth is quite sufficient. You didn't realize that when Marcus disabled the main security system, He forgot about the independent internal circuit I installed myself back in the 90s. I am an electrician by hobby, remember? I like to know how things are wired. I walked closer to the stand, my shadow falling over her. But let us talk about your motivation, Brittany. You were a pharmacist, were you not, until 3 years ago? Brittany's breath hitched. I retired to take care of the family, she stammered. I pulled a document from my folder. This is a certified record from the Georgia State Board of Pharmacy, I said, handing a copy to the bailiff. It states that your license was not retired. It was revoked, permanently. I looked at the judge. She was caught stealing oxycodone and hydrocodone from the inventory of the CVS she managed. She was running a side business, selling pills to pay off her mounting credit card debts. She avoided jail time by taking a plea deal that required her to forfeit her professional standing forever. I turned back to Brittany. You didn't want to protect me. You wanted a pharmacy. You saw an old man with a medicine cabinet full of prescriptions and a safe full of cash, and you saw a way to fund your lifestyle without having to work a real job ever again. You weren't worried about my health. You were worried that I would live long enough to realize you were a thief. Brittany snapped. She stood up in the witness box, her face turning a blotchy, ugly red. You old bastard, she screamed, pointing a finger at me. So what if I looked in the safe? You have millions. You are 72. You are going to die anyway. Why should we have to wait while we are drowning? We deserve that money. We are the ones who have to put up with you. Marcus grabbed her arm, trying to pull her down. Brittany, shut up. Shut up. Get off me, Marcus, she yelled, shoving him away. He is the one who did this. He is the one who played us. He is a monster. Look at him. He is smiling. He loves this. The bailiff stepped toward her, his hand on his holster. Ma'am, sit down. It is all a lie. Brittany continued to howl, her voice echoing off the high marble walls. The video is edited. The records are forged. You are all in on it. You just want to see us lose. Judge Stone slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Silence, she roared. Brittany collapsed back into the chair, sobbing now, but they weren't the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a cornered predator. Judge Stone looked at the monitors, then at the pharmaceutical records, and finally at the woman on the stand. Brittany Blackwood, the judge said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. I have seen many things in this courtroom. I have seen criminals of every stripe. But the level of cold-blooded deception you have displayed today is truly remarkable. You have not only attempted to defraud this court, but you have attempted to destroy a man's life for the sake of a casino debt. The judge turned to me, her eyes softening for a brief second before hardening again. Justice Blackwood, she said, I believe we have seen more than enough of this witness. I nodded. I unbuttoned my jacket and sat down. My heart was steady. The hammer had landed its second blow, and the sound of the impact was the sound of a family's lies shattering into a million pieces. Marcus was staring at his wife as if he were seeing a demon for the first time. Brittany was staring at the floor, the lace handkerchief shredded in her lap. I looked at the clock on the wall. The trial wasn't even an hour old, and the prosecution's case was in ashes. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't just want them to lose. I wanted the world to know why. I reached for my next file. The financial records. The final nail in the coffin. Your Honor, I said, standing up once more, if the court pleases, I would like to discuss the $2 million reason why this petition was filed in the first place. Brittany looked up, her face a mask of pure terror. She knew. She finally realized that the old man in the flannel shirt had been watching them all along. And the verdict was coming. Marcus stood up slowly. The smugness that had carried him through the morning was gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. He looked at the judge, then at the gallery, then finally at me. He wasn't the confident businessman anymore. He was a man watching his escape route crumble in real time, and he was willing to say anything to stop the collapse. Your Honor, he started, his voice cracking. Regardless of what my wife may or may not have done, the core of our petition remains valid. My father does not know how to manage his money. He has lost the ability to understand the scale of his own wealth. We are talking about a man who has over $5 million in a managed trust, yet he lives like he is one step away from the breadline. He gestured toward me with a trembling hand, his eyes wide with a fake, pleading sincerity. Look at him, Your Honor. He wears flannel shirts he bought 10 years ago. He drives a pickup truck with 200,000 miles on the odometer that smells like fish and old tobacco. He spends his afternoons sitting on a folding chair by a muddy creek instead of enjoying the life a man of his stature should have. He hoards his wealth like a symptom of a disease. A sane millionaire doesn't live in a house with a leaking roof and a kitchen from the 1980s. He is confused. He has forgotten that he is a man of means. His frugality isn't a choice. It is a sign of a mind that has snapped back to the poverty of his childhood. He needs a conservator because he has effectively abandoned his own life. I sat there and listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't object. I let him dig the hole until the shovel hit bedrock. It was a classic tactic in these predatory guardianship cases. If you can't prove they are crazy, prove they are failing to maintain their standard of living. They try to turn your modesty into a mental illness. Judge Stone looked at me. Justice Blackwood, would you like to respond to the petitioner's claim of financial incapacity? I stood up. I didn't use the podium this time. I walked to the center of the well, the space between the bench and the tables. I looked at my son. I don't live like a poor man, Marcus, I said. My voice was low, resonant, and filled every corner of the room. I live like a man who knows the value of a clean dollar. You think my truck is a sign of madness because it is old? I kept that truck because the engine is sound and it is paid for. You think my clothes are a sign of decline? I wear these clothes because I have nothing left to prove to anyone. I turned toward the judge. Your Honor, my father was a man who hauled ice in the Georgia heat before the civil rights movement gave him a seat at the table. He taught me that every dollar you earn has a drop of your own sweat on it. He taught me that wealth isn't about what you spend, it is about what you keep. I spent 40 years on the bench watching men in $10,000 suits cry as I sentenced them to life in prison because they couldn't stop wanting more. I chose to live simply because I wanted to be free. I wanted a life where no man could hold a debt over my head. I didn't hoard my money because I was confused. I preserved it because I was building a legacy. I walked back to my table and picked up a thick stack of documents. But let us talk about financial management, Marcus. Since you are so concerned with the proper handling of assets, let us examine yours. I handed a copy of the documents to the bailiff to give to the judge. I kept the original in my hand. Your Honor, Defense Exhibit C. These are the certified financial statements for Marcus and Brittany Blackwood for the last 24 months. Marcus turned the color of ash. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. In the last 2 years, I continued, my son has lost $600,000 in high-risk cryptocurrency markets. He didn't use his own money. He used a predatory margin loan from a firm that is currently under federal investigation. When that market crashed, he didn't cut his losses. He went to Las Vegas. I flipped to the third page. This is a notice of an outstanding marker from the Golden Palace Casino, $250,000. And here is the foreclosure notice on the house I helped them buy 5 years ago. They haven't made a mortgage payment in 8 months. Their total debt, when you factor in credit cards and private loans, exceeds $2 million. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the electronic clock on the wall. The spectators were leaning forward, their eyes fixed on Marcus. The hunter was officially the prey. You didn't file this petition because you were worried about my standard of living, Marcus, I said, turning to face him. You filed it because you have a debt to a man named Rocco that you cannot pay. I heard your phone call on the patio at 3 o'clock in the morning. I heard you tell him that the old man was done and that you would have the trust liquidated by Friday. Marcus slumped back into his chair. He looked like he had been hollowed out. You didn't want to be my guardian, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You wanted to be my liquidator. You wanted to strip mine my life to pay for your gambling habits. You wanted to take the scholarship fund I built for kids in this city and hand it over to a loan shark to save your own skin. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, the law defines guardianship as a protective measure for those who cannot care for themselves. But what we see here is not protection. It is misappropriation. It is a hostile takeover under the guise of family concern. My son isn't here to save me from dementia. He is here to steal the clean money I spent a lifetime earning because he was too lazy and too proud to earn his own. Brittany started to sob, a loud, ugly sound of defeat. Marcus just stared at the table, his hands flat on the wood, his chest heaving. I am 72 years old, I said. I am a retired federal judge. I have a perfect credit score, a paid-for home, and enough savings to live 3 more lifetimes in the style I choose. My son, on the other hand, is a financial disaster who has proven he cannot manage a checking account, let alone a $5 million trust. I slammed the folder down on the table. The sound was like a gavel strike. If anyone in this room needs a guardian, Your Honor, it is the man sitting at the plaintiff's table. But I suspect he will find that the state has a very different kind of facility waiting for him once the authorities look into the fraud he committed to bring this case to court. I sat down. I straightened my tie. I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out in the open, raw and bleeding. I had spent my life defending the law, and today, the law had defended me. Judge Stone was looking at the debt statements, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up at Marcus, and for the first time, there was no pity in her eyes. There was only the cold, hard judgment of a woman who had seen enough. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice like a razor, "do you have anything to say in your defense regarding these records?" Marcus didn't look up. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, a broken man in an expensive suit, finally realizing that you can't play a master at his own game and expect to win. The payoff was complete. The hammer had landed. And the only thing left was the sentencing. The silence that followed the revelation of my son's $2 million debt was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. Marcus was staring at the mahogany table, as if he expected it to open up and swallow him whole. Brittany was shaking so violently that her costume pearls were clicking together like a countdown. I did not sit down. I did not give them a moment to breathe. In a trial, you never let the opponent recover from a blow to the solar plexus. You keep swinging until the count reaches 10. "Your Honor," I said, my voice booming in the high-ceilinged chamber. "The defense does not merely move for a dismissal of this fraudulent petition. I move for the immediate filing of an emergency counter-petition under Georgia Code Section 31-8-101. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents bound in legal blue covers. I had spent 4 hours in Senator Jenkins' library drafting these while the city of Atlanta slept. I walked to the bench and handed the copies to the clerk. "I am charging Marcus Blackwood and Brittany Blackwood with 3 counts of felony criminal activity," I announced. "First count, false imprisonment. They used chemical sedatives to strip me of my agency and locked me in a room against my will. They used a forged medical order to justify a kidnapping in my own home." Judge Stone leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she flipped through my motion. The pages were filled with citations of the exact statutes they had violated. Second count. I continued walking toward the plaintiff's table, where my son sat like a ghost. Elder abuse. Not just the physical trauma of the injections, but financial exploitation of the most heinous kind. They attempted to hijack a $5 million charitable trust to pay for illegal gambling debts and margin calls. They didn't just want my money, Your Honor. They wanted to erase my existence to save their own. Marcus looked up, his eyes wet with tears. "Dad, please," he whispered. I ignored him. I had no son in this room. I only had a defendant. "Third count," I said, my voice hardening. "Medical fraud and conspiracy. They conspired with a disgraced doctor to fabricate a diagnosis for the purpose of defrauding this court. They brought a criminal into my home, a woman with a history of patient abuse, and they gave her the power to drug me." I looked at Judge Stone. "I am requesting an immediate protective order and the initiation of a criminal referral to the district attorney's office. This was not a family dispute, Your Honor. This was a professional hit on a senior citizen's life." Judge Stone finished reading the motion. She looked at Marcus, then at Brittany. Her face was a mask of cold steel. I had seen her give this look to bank robbers and murderers. It was the look of a judge who had run out of mercy. "The court has heard enough," she said. "The petition for guardianship is not only dismissed with prejudice, but it is vacated as a fraudulent filing." She slammed her gavel down with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Bang! "The court accepts the counter-petition for emergency relief," she announced. "I find that there is overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy and elder endangerment." She looked at the bailiff standing by the side doors. "Bailiff, lock the doors," she ordered. "Nobody leaves this courtroom." The sound of the heavy brass bolts sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage closing, not on me, but on the predators. Marcus jumped up, his face contorted in panic. "You can't do this. This is a civil court. You can't just arrest us." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," Judge Stone barked. "You are in my house now, and in my house, we do not drug the elderly for gambling money." Brittany was hyperventilating now, her fake pearls finally snapping and scattering across the floor like tiny white skulls. "It was his idea," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "He told me the old man wouldn't know. He said he was half dead anyway. I was just doing what my husband told me." "Shut up, Brittany," Marcus yelled. Ambrose Chadwick, the lawyer, saw the writing on the wall. He saw the handcuffs coming. He saw his license to practice law disappearing into a shredder. He began frantically stuffing his papers into his briefcase, his hands shaking so badly he spilled his water. "Your Honor," he stammered, standing up, "I would like to move for an immediate withdrawal as counsel. I was clearly misinformed by my clients. I had no knowledge of any fraudulent activity. I was acting in good faith based on the medical reports provided to me. I cannot in good conscience continue to represent these individuals." He started to back away from the table, heading toward the side exit. I stepped into his path. I stood 6 feet 2 inches of solid resolve and 40 years of memory. I blocked his way. "Not so fast, Ambrose," I said. My voice was quiet, but it had the weight of a mountain. Chadwick blinked his eyes, darting back and forth. "Justice Blackwood, please. I'm a victim here too. I'm just a lawyer doing his job." "Your job was to perform due diligence," I said. "Your job was to ensure that a medical report wasn't bought for $5,000 in cash. But you didn't do your job, did you? You saw a multi-million-dollar estate, and you saw a fat contingency fee. You didn't care if I was crazy. You just cared if the check cleared." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Chadwick is not a victim. He is an essential cog in this machine. Under the crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege, his communications with his clients regarding this petition are not protected. He facilitated the filing of a known fraudulent document. He is an accomplice to the conspiracy." Chadwick's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. "That is slander," he yelled. "It is a statement of fact, supported by your own signature on the filing," I replied. Judge Stone nodded. "Mr. Chadwick, you will remain at your table. I am referring your conduct to the State Bar Ethics Committee and the Attorney General for investigation of barratry and conspiracy to commit fraud. If you move toward that door again, I will have the bailiff taser you." Chadwick sank into his chair, his head in his hands. He was done. The bottom feeder had finally choked on his own bait. The courtroom was a scene of total chaos. Spectators were whispering. The court reporter was typing at a furious pace. Brittany was sobbing on the floor. Marcus was shouting at the ceiling. I walked back to my table. I didn't feel the need to shout. I didn't feel the need to gloat. I felt the deep, cold satisfaction of a job well done. I had rewired the circuit. I had diverted the power. The surge that was meant to destroy me had been grounded, and it was now burning out the very people who had sent it. The bailiff walked over to the plaintiff's table, holding 2 sets of silver handcuffs. Marcus looked at the metal. He looked at me. "Dad, please, don't do this to me," he begged. "Think about the family name. Think about what people will say." I looked at my son. I saw the weakness. I saw the greed. I saw the man who had traded his father's life for a seat at a poker table. "The family name is Blackwood," I said. "And in this family, we stand for the law. You chose to stand against it." I turned my back on him. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the final period at the end of a long, dark chapter. Judge Stone looked down at me from the bench. "Justice Blackwood," she said, her voice soft. "I am truly sorry it had to come to this." I nodded. "Don't be sorry, Sarah," I said. "The law is a jealous mistress. She demands the truth. And today she got it." I picked up my briefcase. I straightened my tie. I walked out of the well of the court toward the gallery. I didn't look at Marcus as the police led him out. I didn't look at Brittany as she was carried out, screaming. I walked through the double doors and out into the sunshine of Atlanta. The air was cool and crisp. The birds were singing. I was 72 years old. I was a retired judge, and for the first time in a very long time, I was a free man. But there was still one more thing to do. The battle in the courtroom was won, but the battle for the soul of my family was just beginning. I had to see Marcus one last time. I had to give him the final verdict. I walked toward the parking lot where Senator Jenkins was waiting. "We have a long day ahead of us, Bill," I said as I climbed into the car. Jenkins smiled. "The hammer never stops, does it?" he asked. "No," I said, looking at the courthouse one last time. Not until the job is done. Would you like me to move on to the next part where I visit my son in jail to deliver the final lesson? The gavel did not just fall, it crashed. Judge Sarah Stone did not look like the young intern I once knew. She looked like an avenging angel of the law. She looked at Marcus and Brittany not as human beings, but as a stain on the carpet of her courtroom. The evidence I had presented, the debt, the margin calls, the recording of the fake doctor, it was too much for any defense to withstand. Chadwick was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. He knew the game was over. He knew his career was dead, and he was just waiting for the handcuffs. Judge Stone leaned into her microphone, and her voice was a cold edge that sliced through the murmurs of the gallery. I find the petition for guardianship to be a fraudulent filing, based on criminal conspiracy and the exploitation of a vulnerable adult, she said. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus. This court is not just dismissing your case, Mr. Blackwood. This court is referring this matter for immediate criminal prosecution. She turned to the bailiffs. Deputy, take the petitioners into custody, she commanded. I am ordering their immediate arrest for elder abuse, criminal fraud, and false imprisonment. No bail is to be set until they are arraigned before a criminal magistrate. The sound of the bailiffs moving was the sound of reality finally catching up to their lies. They didn't run. Where could they go? The doors were locked. The trap I had set with Senator Jenkins had worked perfectly. One of the bailiffs, a tall man with a stone face, stepped behind Marcus. He didn't ask him to stand. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and pulled him up. Marcus looked like a puppet with its strings cut. He was trembling so hard his knees were knocking together. When the first silver cuff clicked around his right wrist, he let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream. It was the sound of a man realizing the world he had built out of paper and lies was finally on fire. "Dad," he wailed, turning his head toward me as the second cuff clicked shut. "Dad, please tell them to stop. I am sorry. I swear I am sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to get us out of the hole. I wanted things to be better for the family. I did it for us, Dad. Please tell the judge it was a mistake." I stood up slowly. I adjusted the sleeves of my Armani suit. I looked at my son. I saw the tears streaming down his face, ruining the expensive look he had worked so hard to maintain. I saw the weakness in his eyes. He still didn't get it. He still thought he could talk his way out of a felony. I walked to the edge of the table and looked him dead in the eye. "Marcus," I said, and my voice was as dry as the desert. "A court of law does not sit in judgment of your intent. It does not care what you wanted or what you hoped for. The law judges your conduct. It judges your actions. And your actions, Marcus, were criminal. You didn't do this for the family. You did this for your greed. And you did it because you were a coward who couldn't face his own debts." I turned my back on him. The hammer does not feel pity for the nail. But the drama wasn't over. As the bailiffs moved toward Brittany, she didn't beg. She didn't cry for mercy. She turned into a cornered animal. She looked at the handcuffs, and then she looked at Marcus, and the mask of the loving wife finally dissolved into pure venom. "You pathetic loser," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high marble walls. I told you we should have sold the house and left for Mexico weeks ago. But no, you said we could get more. You said the old man was too stupid to catch on. You said you had him under control." She tried to lunge at Marcus, but the bailiff caught her by the waist. She was kicking and screaming now, her modest gray dress tearing at the seams. "This is all your fault, Marcus," she howled. "You and your stupid crypto bets. You and your gambling. You dragged me into this. You told me he wouldn't remember the injections. You said he was a vegetable." Marcus looked at her, his eyes wide with horror. "Brittany, please," he whispered. "Don't Brittany me, you spineless coward," she spat. "I hope you rot in a cell. I hope they take everything. I should have left you when the first bank notice came. You ruined my life." The bailiff slammed her onto the table to get the cuffs on. The string of fake pearls she was wearing finally snapped. The tiny white beads scattered across the floor like teeth, rolling in every direction. It was the perfect metaphor for their life, shiny on the outside, but hollow and easily broken. I sat back down at my table. I picked up my gold pen and placed it in my briefcase. I watched as they were led out. Marcus was still sobbing, calling for me, begging for a lawyer, begging for a chance. Brittany was still screaming curses at him, her voice fading as the heavy double doors finally closed behind them. The courtroom was silent again. The spectators were in shock. Chadwick was still sitting there, staring at the beads on the floor. Judge Stone looked at me. "Justice Blackwood," she said, and her voice was soft. "Would you like a moment?" "No, Your Honor," I said, standing up. "I have had enough moments in this room to last a lifetime." I walked out of the bar and down the center aisle. I didn't look at the beads on the floor. I didn't look at the chair Marcus had knocked over. I walked out into the lobby, where the portrait of my younger self hung on the wall. I looked at that younger man, the one who believed that the law could fix everything. I realized then that the law can't fix a broken heart, but it can certainly provide the room to let it heal. I was 72 years old, and I was alone. But as I walked out into the Atlanta sunshine, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face, and I knew that for the first time in 3 years, I was truly safe. But there was still a debt to be paid. Not a financial one, but a moral one. I had to see Marcus in the holding cell. I had to deliver the final verdict, because a judge's job isn't done until the sentence is served. I walked toward the elevators. The hammer had one last strike to make. The air inside the Fulton County Jail was thick with the smell of industrial floor wax and the cold, metallic scent of despair. It was a smell I had encountered many times in my career, but I never thought I would breathe it in while visiting my own flesh and blood. I walked through the security checkpoints with the same steady pace I had used to walk into my chambers for 40 years. The guards recognized me. They didn't ask for my ID until they absolutely had to. They tipped their hats and whispered, "Good morning, Justice." They saw the suit. They saw the dignity. They saw a man who was still the law, even without a robe. I was led into the visiting area. It was a room divided by thick, reinforced glass and a row of plastic stools bolted to the floor. I sat down and waited. A moment later, a heavy steel door opened, and a man in an orange jumpsuit was led in by a deputy. It was Marcus. In just 7 days, the world had carved its mark into him. The bespoke navy suit was gone, replaced by the rough cotton of a prisoner. His hair, which he used to spend an hour styling, was a matted mess. There were deep purple shadows under his eyes, and his skin had the sallow gray tint of someone who hadn't seen the sun. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his charm had no currency here. He sat down on the stool and grabbed the heavy black receiver. I did the same. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was a jagged rasp. "Dad, thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. It is a nightmare in here. The food, the people. I can't do this, Dad. I'm not like them." I looked at him through the glass. I didn't see a criminal. I saw the boy I used to take to the park. I saw the toddler who used to hold my thumb when we walked across the street. But I also saw the man who had held a needle to my arm. "The law does not distinguish between who you are and what you did, Marcus," I said. My voice was calm and resonant, echoing in the small plastic earpiece. "You are exactly like them. You are a defendant awaiting trial for multiple felonies." No, don't talk like that," Marcus said, pressing his palm against the glass. "You are Thaddeus Blackwood. You are the hammer. You know everyone in this city. You know the district attorney. You know the judge who is going to hear my bail motion on Monday. Just call them Dad. Just one phone call. Tell them it was a family misunderstanding. Tell them you aren't pressing charges. If you say it was all a mistake, they have to drop it." I watched a tear roll down his cheek and disappear into the stubble on his chin. He wasn't crying because he was sorry for what he did to me. He was crying because he was afraid of the consequences. "I spent 40 years of my life protecting the integrity of the law, Marcus," I said. "I have stood in the face of politicians and mobsters who thought they could buy my influence. I have sacrificed time with my family and my own peace of mind to ensure that the scale of justice remained balanced. My name means something in this city because it cannot be bought and it cannot be bent." Marcus shook his head frantically. "But I am your son. This isn't a politician or a mobster. It is your own blood. You can't let me rot in here. Brittany is in the women's wing, blaming me for everything. Her lawyer is already trying to cut a deal to testify against me. They are going to bury me, Dad. If I don't get bail, I'm done. Please, just pull a few strings. Use your power, just this once." I leaned closer to the glass. My reflection was ghosted over his face. "My power comes from the law, Marcus," I said, "not from over it. You are asking me to spend the final years of my life destroying the very foundation I spent my career building. You are asking me to become the corrupt man I spent my life judging. And for what? For a son who would drug his own father for a gambling debt. For a son who would declare me insane to steal my home. Dad, I was desperate, Marcus pleaded. Rocco was going to kill me.
I didn't have a choice. We always have a choice, Marcus, I interrupted. You chose the casino. You chose the crypto bets. You chose the lies. And when the bill came due, you chose to sacrifice your father instead of your pride. You had 40 years to earn my respect, and you traded it all for a $2 million marker. I sat back. I felt a profound sense of finality. The bridge was not just burned, it had been dismantled, and the river had swept away the debris. I have made a decision, Marcus, I said. The house is being sold. I have already signed the listing agreement. The proceeds will go into the Blackwood Scholarship Fund for underprivileged students who actually want to work for their future. The $5 million trust is frozen and will remain so until my death, at which point it will be donated to the law library. You will not inherit a single cent from my estate. Marcus's eyes went wide. His jaw dropped. You are disinheriting me? You are leaving me with nothing? I am leaving you with the truth, I said. That is more than you gave me. I reached into the small bag I had brought with me. I placed 2 items in the secure transfer drawer at the base of the glass partition. The deputy checked them, then slid them through to Marcus's side. Marcus looked down. He picked up the first item. It was a black leather-bound Bible, the one that had belonged to my father, the ice hauler. Then he picked up the second item. It was a folded piece of paper. He opened it, expecting a check. His face fell. It was a list of names and phone numbers for the office of the public defender. What is this? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. That is a list of competent lawyers who work for the state, I said. Since your accounts are frozen and I will not be paying for private counsel, you will need to apply for a court-appointed attorney. They are good people, Marcus. They believe in the law. They will ensure you have a fair trial, which is more than you intended for me. Dad, you can't be serious, Marcus whispered. You are leaving me with a public defender? I am a Blackwood. The name Blackwood stands for justice, Marcus, I said. And justice is exactly what you are going to get. I stood up. I didn't feel the need to say anything else. There were no more arguments to be made. The evidence was in the record, and the verdict had been delivered. I looked at my son one last time. I saw the little boy for a brief second. Then he vanished behind the orange jumpsuit and the glass. I turned my back on him. Dad! Marcus screamed, hitting the glass with his fist. Dad, don't walk away. Come back, please. I'm sorry. The deputy stepped forward and grabbed Marcus by the arms, pulling him back toward the steel door. His screams echoed through the sterile room, but they didn't reach me. I kept walking. I walked out of the jail and into the bright Atlanta afternoon. Senator Jenkins was waiting in the Lincoln. He opened the door for me. How was he? Jenkins asked. He was exactly where he chose to be, I said. I climbed into the car and looked at the city, the buildings I had protected, the streets I had walked. I felt a strange sense of peace. I was 72 years old, and I had lost my son, but I had kept my soul. And in the end, that is the only thing you take with you. Good luck, son, I whispered as we pulled away from the curb. You are going to need it. The car moved into the traffic, and I didn't look back. The hammer was finished with this case. It was time for a long, quiet afternoon by the creek. We often spend our lives building castles for people who would happily sell the bricks the moment we turn our backs. I learned that justice isn't just found in a courtroom. It is found in the boundaries we set for ourselves. Loyalty isn't a debt we owe to blood. It is a respect we earn through character. My son mistook my silence for weakness and my frugality for senility, but he forgot that a clean conscience is the only wealth that never depreciates. Invest in the truth. It is the only verdict that can set you free. Would you like me to write a final summary or a conclusion for the story? The lake is exactly how I remembered it. The water is a deep, shimmering blue, reflecting the ancient cypress trees that have stood guard over these banks long before I was born, and will likely be here long after I am gone. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. It is a humble place, far away from the marble hallways of the courthouse
and the polished mahogany of the life I once knew. I unfolded my old canvas chair. It squeaked in protest, a familiar sound that felt more like a greeting than a complaint. I sat down, and for the first time in weeks, I took a breath that went all the way down to my soul. I am 72 years old. My name is Justice Blackwood. People spent decades calling me the Hammer. But today, I am just a man with a fishing rod and a quiet conscience. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The tremors of the sedatives were gone. The chemical fog had evaporated. I was wearing my favorite flannel shirt, the one Marcus hated because it looked cheap. He never understood that the softest things in life are the ones that have been washed 1,000 times. He only valued the crispness of the new, the shine of the expensive. He didn't realize that a life without a history is just a hollow shell. People keep asking me if I am sad. My neighbor at the lake house stopped by this morning with a basket of muffins and a look of profound pity. She asked me how I could bear it, how I could stand the thought of my only son and his wife sitting in a cold cell while I sat here in the sun. I told her the truth. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a lightness that I hadn't known in years. It is a strange thing to say about your own flesh and blood, but cutting Marcus and Brittany out of my life was not like a divorce or a death. It was like a surgery. It was the removal of a malignant tumor that had been draining my energy and my peace for far too long. You do not mourn a tumor when it is gone. You feel relieved that you can finally breathe without pain. You feel thankful that the infection didn't reach the heart. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, smooth glass of my smartphone. It had been vibrating all morning. Reporters were calling. Lawyers were calling. Distant cousins I haven't seen in 30 years were calling, suddenly concerned about my well-being, now that they knew I had $5 million and no heir. They all wanted a piece of the story. They all wanted a piece of the man. I pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. One missed call from the district attorney. 3 messages from news outlets. A text from my former clerk Sarah Stone, telling me she was proud of me. I smiled at Sarah's message, but I didn't reply. I didn't want to talk about the law today. I didn't want to talk about justice, or evidence, or the betrayal that had played out in front of the world. I wanted the silence. I stood up and walked to the edge of the wooden pier. The water was still as a mirror. I looked at my reflection. I saw the lines around my eyes and the gray in my beard. I saw a man who had survived a storm. I looked at the phone in my hand. Everything that tied me to the chaos was in that little box. The drama, the debt, the lies, and the voices of people who only saw me as a bank account. I didn't hesitate. I didn't make a grand speech. I just opened my hand and let it go. The phone hit the water with a small, clean splash. I watched it sink, fluttering like a dying fish, as it drifted down into the dark depths of the lake. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles, growing larger and larger until they touched the shore and vanished. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. No more notifications, no more bail motions, no more screams of entitlement. The circuit was finally broken. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up my fishing rod, but I didn't even put a hook on the line. I just wanted to watch the bobber dance on the surface. I thought about the future. For years I had worried about my legacy. I had worried about what would happen to the money I had saved and the name I had built. I thought I had to pass it down to Marcus because that is what fathers do. I thought that blood was the only vessel for a man's history. I was wrong. This morning before I drove to the lake, I met with my estate attorney and Senator Jenkins. We finalized the paperwork for the Eleanor Blackwood Scholarship Fund. It is named after my late wife, a woman who believed that education was the only true way to freedom. That $5 million isn't going to buy a boat in Florida. It isn't going to pay off a gambling debt in Las Vegas. It is going to pay for the tuition of young men and women from the west side of Atlanta who have the brains but not the means. It is going for the kids who stay up late studying by candlelight because they want to be judges and doctors and engineers. It is going to the people who understand that a kingdom is built with bricks of hard work, not stolen gold. My assets will finally go to people who deserve them. They will go to people who will honor my wife's name instead of trying to bury mine. My house will be sold, and the proceeds will build a new wing at the local library. Marcus and Brittany thought they were the owners of my future. They didn't realize they were just the footnotes in a much larger story. I felt a cool breeze blow across the lake. It carried the scent of rain.
I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. I realized then that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who don't see you. Solitude is being alone, and finally seeing yourself. I am Thaddeus Blackwood. I am a husband who loved his wife. I am a judge who respected the law. And I am a man who was brave enough to stand up to the people who shared his blood, to save the person who shared his soul. The hammer is retired. The trial is over. The verdict is final. I watched a dragonfly land on the tip of my fishing rod. It stayed there for a long moment, its wings shimmering in the light, before taking flight and disappearing into the trees. I am at peace. A gavel hits the sound block with a definitive strike, signaling the end of confusion and the restoration of order. In life, we must be our own judges. We often let toxic family members overrule our happiness simply because we share a last name. But I learned that justice isn't just found in a courtroom. It is found in the boundaries we set. My son mistook my silence for weakness and my frugality for senility. He forgot that before you can inherit a kingdom, you must first prove you are worthy of the crown. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We are usually the ones writing the verdict. If you believe that character matters more than blood, and that justice always finds its way home, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth and triumph. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Do you think I was too hard on my son, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every comment, and I want to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay strong and keep the law of your own heart.